The Man with a Load of Mischief by Martha Grimes. Saturday, December the 19th. Outside the Jack and Hammer, a dog growled. Inside, his view of the high street obstructed by the window at his shoulder, Melrose Plant sat in the curve of the bay, drinking Old Peculiar and reading Rambo. The dog growled deep in his throat and started barking again, something it had been doing intermittently for the last 15 minutes. Sun streaming through the cerulean blue and deep green of the tulip design of the leaded panes threw rainbow colours across his table as Melrose Plant rose up to peer over the reverse letters advertising Hardy's Crown. The dog sitting in the snow outside the public house was a scruffy Jack Russell belonging to Miss Crisp, who ran the second-hand furniture shop across the street. It barked on. Melrose Plant said, "I direct your attention, Dick, to the curious incident of the dog in the daytime." Across the room, Dick Scroggs, the publican, paused in his polishing of the bevelled mirror behind the bar. "What's that, my lord?" "Nothing. Just paraphrasing Sir Arthur." "Sir Arthur, my lord?" "Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes, you know." "Actually, I believe it was the dog in the night-time." Scroggs applied his cloth to the mirror. "Night-time, daytime, I only wish the bleeding dog would stop it. He'd be driving me crazy. Ain't it enough me nerves are in a state with this murder over at Simon Matchett's place?" Dick Scroggs was, for all his height and girth, a very nervous individual. Long Piddleton's murder had him constantly looking over his shoulder and regarding any stranger who walked into the Jack and Hammer with suspicion. It was the murder, Melrose supposed, that had put him in mind of Conan Doyle. Murder, in fact, was not nearly so intriguing as murder in fancy, but he did have to admit that their own murder had a certain flair. The head of the victim had been shoved down in a keg of beer. The dog still barked. Dick Scroggs threw down his bar towel and went to the row of casement windows just beyond Plant's table, fronting High Street. Scroggs wound out one of them, and a blur of snow flew in around the corners. He shouted at the barking animal, "I'll be out there to kick your scruffy bleeding head off, just see if I don't." "How awfully un-English of you, Dick," said Melrose, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles over his fine nose and returning to Rambo. But Scroggs' shouts had only exacerbated the barking, since the dog now thought it had got some attention and meant to keep it. Dick Scroggs threw open the door and went outside to show the dog he meant business. Plant had managed to read part way through Enfance when he heard Scroggs gasp. "My God, my lord, come, quick!" Plant looked up to see the publican's head framed in the snowy window. The face was grey and ghastly, a blown-up version of the gargoyle heads beneath the beam outside, which gave the ancient building a quaint, ecclesiastical air. Plant made for the door. Outside he ploughed through ankle-deep snow to where Dick Scroggs and the Jack Russell stood side by side, looking upward. "Good God!" said Melrose Plant, as the clock chimed the noon hour and another clump of snow fell from the figure atop the wooden beam that jutted out over the walk. The figure was not the mechanical smith usually located there, whose hammer made simulated strikes at a forge. "It's that Mr. Ainsley that come in last night, my lord. For a room he did. How long's he been up there, I wonder?" Melrose Plant, ordinarily a man of extreme self-possession, was not sure how his own voice would sound. Hard to tell. Could have been for hours. All night, perhaps, Dick. "And no one's seen him, my lord?" 20 feet overhead and shrouded in snow, Dick." As Melrose spoke, another chunk fell, molten in the sun, plop, at their feet. The barking of the dog and Plant's and Scroggs' attendance at this macabre affair seemed to have waked High Street from its snowy sleep, and people were appearing out of shops, in windows, down walks and alleyways. Melrose saw that Constable Pluck had appeared outside the station up the street and was dragging on his dark blue overcoat. "And here was the missus wondering if he'd be wanting a bit of breakfast," said Scroggs. Melrose polished the lenses of his spectacles. "I'd say it makes no odds to Mr. Ainsley." The Jack and Hammer was wedged between Trueblood's Antiques and a haberdasher's sensibly called the Shop. Farther along, just before the bridge that spanned the Piddle River, was Long Piddleton's police station. The pub had once been painted a rather distinct ultramarine, but its most unusual feature was the structure attached to its front, and from which it derived its name. Standing atop a sturdy beam was a mechanical smith, carved out of wood and holding a copy of a 17th century forge hammer. When the large clock beneath the beam told the hours, Jack would raise his hammer and strike away at the invisible iron forge. The beam was 20 feet off the ground, about 7 feet long and 2 feet in girth, and it jutted over the walk below. Originally, the carved figure had been painted into a bright blue coat and aquamarine trousers, but the paint was dull now, chipped and peeling. Jack was a favourite butt of jokes and horseplay. The wooden figure was treated very much like a rugby trophy, something to be carted away by delinquent boys from the nearby market town of Sidbury, and later rescued by equally delinquent boys from Long Piddleton. It was, in a way, the town mascot. Just this past Guy Fawkes Day, several children had sneaked into the pub while Dick and his missus were fast asleep. They had gone up the back stairs and lifted Jack from his supporting pole and carried him off to the graveyard of St. Rule's Church and buried him. "Poor Jack," Mrs. Withersby had lamented from her post by the Jack and Hammer's fire. Mrs. Withersby charred for Scroggs sometimes to get her drinking money. "Not even a Christian burial, not even in confiscated ground. Bad luck it'll be all round, mark me. Poor Jack." Since Mrs. Withersby's oracular powers were somewhat diminished by gin, not many people listened. But bad luck it was. Just one night before the discovery of Mr. Ainsley's body, another body had been found in an inn less than 1 mile from Long Piddleton's High Street. The body of one William Small, Esquire. With word that a killer was on the loose, the villagers were sticking to their parlours and fireplaces, something they might have done in any case because of the snow. It had been snowing for 2 days all over Northamptonshire, all over the north of England indeed. Lovely soft stuff, which moulded on roofs and settled into corners of windows. With the snow coming down and the smoke rising up from the chimney pots, Long Piddleton looked like a Christmas card of itself, despite the recent murder. On the morning of December the 19th, the snow had finally stopped, and a bright sun had come out and melted enough of it so that the cottages could be seen to be prettily, even lavishly painted. Perhaps bored with all the usual limestone, in this limestone belt of Northamptonshire, they had gone rioting with ice-cream parlour colours, a hint of strawberry here, of lemon there, and farther on a glimmer of pistachio, and then a sudden splash of emerald. An odd place for one murder to occur, much less two. Sunday, December the 20th. The vicar bit into his fat rascal, and crumbs cascaded down his dark suit front. "These murders put me in mind of the ostrich in Colnbrook." Around a mouthful of fairy cake, Melrose Plant's aunt, Lady Agatha Ardrey, said, "Far as I'm concerned, we've probably got another Jack the Ripper amongst us." She surveyed the tea table and eyed the vicar accusingly. "You've taken the last of the fat rascals, Denzil." Outside the mullioned panes of the vicarage, a fine English rain drifted its delicate veil across the churchyard. The church of St. Rule's and its vicarage sat on a hump of earth not quite a hill, directly behind and above the village square. The square was enclosed by Tudor buildings, thatched roofs, and pantiled roofs, all snug and wedged together. Melrose disliked coming to tea at the vicarage, especially when his aunt was invited. The vicar's housekeeper was never at her best in the food department. He had been listening to his aunt and the vicar rehash these 2 murders for nearly 2 hours, and he was horribly hungry. He reached out with trepidation for a brandy snap. Politely he inquired of the vicar, "You mentioned the ostrich?" Denzil Smith went on eagerly. "Yes. You see, when the proprietor came across a traveller with a good bit of money, he would book him into the room with the bed set over a trap-door. When the unfortunate and unwary guest was sleeping soundly, The trapdoor sprang open, and he fell into a cauldron of boiling water. Lady Ardry sat there in the library, solid and square and grey as a cement block, her stubby legs crossed and her pudgy fingers busy with her second Eccles cake. "Are you suggesting that Matchett and Scroggs are disposing of their own guests, Vicar?" "No, no." Denzil Smith was not a particularly pious man, but he was a curious one, which made him excellent company for Lady Agatha Ardry. They were dependent on one another in the mindless way of two gibbons dedicated to picking fleas off one another's fur. He was the village repository of old scraps of history, a walking book of memorabilia. Looking around, Melrose thought the vicarage was the perfect milieu for Denzil Smith. It was dark. Clematis and bindweed roved freely along the windows. He wondered how it would feel to be strangled by a bindweed. That reminded him of William Small, strangled with a length of wire used to wrap around the cork of a champagne bottle. Lady Ardry was talking about the expected visit from Scotland Yard. Melrose diverted her attention. "I don't know why they need Scotland Yard when they have you, Agatha." His aunt simpered and passed him the awful rock cakes. "I do spin intriguing plots, don't I?" Long Piddleton had lately begun to attract artists and writers, and Lady Ardry, who had lived here for many years, fancied herself a writer of mysteries, having taken up the cudgel after the passing of the great lady of detective fiction. She did nothing with the cudgel, Melrose observed, except wave it. Agatha hit her fist into her hand. "Scotland Yard will want to talk to me straight away, of course." Melrose dreaded the resumption of his aunt's recitation of her role in these murders, which he'd heard several times before. He rose and bowed slightly. "I'll be off, then." "I should think you'd be a bit more excited. Of course it was Scroggs who actually found your body." "More precisely, it was a Jack Russell. The Yard will question it first, no doubt. Good day." As the vicar walked plant to the front door, Lady Ardry's voice trailed after him. "Your facetiousness hardly becomes you, Melrose, but is what I might have expected. Remember you're taking us to Matchett's for dinner this evening." Melrose Plant felt slightly doomed himself as he listened to the vicar relate the grisly murder some years ago of a barmaid in Cheapside. Ardry End was known to the villagers as the Great House. It was a turreted and towered manor house built of sandstone, hues ranging from rose to russet, depending upon the angle of the sun. Ardry End's situation, amidst the streams and the sheep and the lavender hills, nearly brought Agatha to tears, because she didn't own it. That her own husband had not been the 8th Earl of Caverness and 12th Viscount Ardry had always been a searing wound. The Honourable Robert Ardry had been, instead, the useless younger brother of Melrose Plant's father. Where her nephew had dropped the title of Lord Ardry, Agatha had picked it up and dusted it off, transforming herself overnight into Lady Ardry. Melrose's uncle died in a gaming room at the age of 59, having lost what little money remained to him, so that Lady Ardry was more or less dependent upon the generosity of her brother-in-law's family, a fact that did not add to Melrose's popularity. Melrose Plant regarded his aunt as the albatross which his uncle had shot down and left to hang around his nephew's neck. Robert had shot her down on a pleasure tour of the United States. Agatha was American, but she buried this as well as she could under tweed suits, walking sticks, interminable plates of cucumber sandwiches, and a good ear for English idiom, but a terrible one for proper names. His aunt used every pretext to appear suddenly at Ardry End, to look covetously at the bisque statuary, the portraits, the Chinese and William Morris wall coverings, the Waterford, the swans, all of those appointments of the stately, serene home. The door to Ardry End was opened by the butler, Riven. To say that Riven was of the old school was to put it mildly. Melrose had inherited Riven along with the portraits and stocks and Morris wallpapers, and during their relationship the master had done only one thing to upset the butler. Melrose had given up his title several years ago after a few sessions in the House of Lords. The news had been handed to the butler one morning at breakfast, casually, like someone giving back the plate for more kippers. "Oh, incidentally, Riven, it won't be m'lord any longer." And Riven had stood there, carved out of rock, his expression magnificently unchanged. "I thought it inappropriate, you know, holding down a job, at the same time having that awkward title." Riven had merely bowed and held out the little silver dish of buttered eggs circumscribed by sausages. "And anyway, I never have fancied taking my seat in the House of Lords. What a bloody bore that would be." As a sausage went plop on the plate, Riven begged to excuse himself, saying he felt a bit unwell. Lady Ardry had received the news with far more ambivalence. On the one hand, how delightful to tell herself he was "my nephew the commoner." On the other hand, it was like pulling back the pretty pink bunting with the relatives standing around, only to discover the baby had suddenly grown warts. Thus the title was the one area where Agatha had bested Melrose. His referring to holding down a job was a bit of an understatement. Melrose held the chair of French Romantic Poetry at the University of London, where he taught about 4 months of the year. So to top it off, he was Professor Melrose Plant. It made Lady Ardry positively shudder. And he had one other vice which caused her no end of suffering. He was simply too damnably clever. Plant could do the Times crossword in less than 15 minutes. Plant sighed as he sat gloomily in front of the fireplace. Now there was this beastly murder business to which his aunt could bring all of her non-existent deductive skills. He did not want to hear about this small person, or the other either, but he would be forced to hear about them, possibly for the rest of his life. For Melrose did not put too much stock in the deductive powers of the nation's police force either. Monday, December the 21st. Shielding his eyes with his hand like a man facing into the full glare of the sun, Detective Chief Inspector Richard Jury squinted suspiciously at Chief Superintendent Racer. Racer's hand toyed with the gold chain running from one vest pocket to the other. His French cuffed shirt was powder blue, and his Donegal tweed suit bespoke tailor. Inspector Jury regarded his superior as a bit of a dandy, a bit of a dilettante, and a very little bit, of a detective. Jury looked out from under the tent of his hand. A man with his head shoved in a beer keg? He still hoped Racer would tell him it was all a bad joke. Annoyed, Racer snapped his fingers. "The facts! Let's hear the facts!" Jury sighed. Having been given a rundown on the murders in Northamptonshire, he was now expected to give it back, like a stenographer. The first victim, William Small, found in the wine cellar of the man with a load of mischief. Choked with a length of wire, his head shoved in a beer keg. The second victim, Rufus Ainsley, found at the Jack and Hammer, on the wooden support beam above the clock. A waitress at the inn, Daphne Murch, was the first one to come upon the body of William Small, and she called the proprietor, Simon Matchett. There were a number of people in the bar, and all claimed not to know the deceased. Small had appeared only that day, desiring lodgings. That was the first crime. The second occurred 24 hours later. The victims were both strangers to Long Piddleton, having arrived within a day or two of one another. "Day or two? What sort of gibberish is that, lad? What do you think you're doing, Jury? Guessing long shots? Mucking about in the football pools? A policeman's job is to be exact." And Racer plugged his mouth with a thick cigar, staring at Jury while the intercom buzzed. Racer flipped the switch. He listened a moment, flicking glances at Jury. Yes, he's here. Over 6 feet, chestnut hair, with dark grey eyes, good teeth, and a ravishing smile. That's our Jury, all right." It was one of the girls who worked in C4. She had brought round the file on the Northamptonshire murders for Jury. "Bring it in, then, bring it in," Racer said, as he slammed down the receiver, bouncing several ballpoint pens. "Except for the ravishing smile bit, that description could fit a horse." Fiona Klingmore entered, and getting her priorities straight, smiled warmly at Jury, before handing over the manila folder to Racer. She was wearing one of those 1940s outfits she seemed to like. Black, high-heeled shoes with a button strap across the instep and a tight black skirt. As usual, her neckline was down and her skirt was up. Fiona always seemed to wear her clothes at half-mast. Perhaps she was mourning chastity, thought Jury. Racer shooed her off with a flap of his hand. "Quite the ladies' man, aren't you, Jury? Do you think we could get back down to business now? Small, William. Ainsley, Rufus. 24 hours apart. No identification. We only know their names because they signed the registers. Nothing to connect either of them with anyone in the village. That's the lot." Jerry knew it infuriated Racer to have to put him on the case. Everyone in the division felt that it was Jury who should be chief superintendent. For his part, Jury didn't care. He didn't want to be in charge of a division. Having no wife and no children dependent upon him, he could afford the lesser salary. "When did you want me to leave, sir?" "Yesterday," snapped Racer. "Get down to this god-forsaken village. Take Sergeant Wiggins with you. He's not doing anything except blowing his goddamn nose." Jury sighed. As usual, Racer hadn't even asked him to choose his own detective sergeant. Wiggins was a young man made old through hypochondria, likeable enough and efficient, but always on the verge of keeling over. "I'll gather up Wiggins and leave early in the morning," said Jury. Racer was out of his chair and pulling on his beautiful tailored overcoat. "Well, gather him up then, and for God's sake, Jury, remember you work here, will you? When you get to that one-eyed village, report in for a change." It was after midnight by the time Jury emerged at the Angel tube stop. He was extremely tired and did not relish the idea of an early train to Northamptonshire. He swerved off into Camden Passage, which he liked this time of night, eerily silent as the little shops were. He walked out of the passage, then on for a couple of streets to his own row of houses. Jury's flat was on the second floor. There were 5 others, and he scarcely saw his neighbours because of his weird hours. But he did know the woman who lived in the basement rooms, Mrs. Wasserman. He saw there was a light glowing there, behind heavily grilled and draped windows. Jury let himself into his flat and switched on the overhead. The room sprang up in the light and left him, as always, dismayed by the mess, as if thieves had just ransacked his rooms and made a fast exit. It was the books, mostly. They spilled from the cases and tables. Jury heard a rap at the door. "Inspector Jury," said the woman outside when he opened the door, clasping and unclasping her hands. "He's out there again. I don't know what to do. Why don't he just leave me alone?" She spread her hands in a helpless gesture. She was a heavy woman, dressed in a black dress, pinned at the bosom with a filigree brooch. Her black hair was pulled back smooth and tight into a bun coiled up like a spring. "I'll go down with you," said Jury. "It's the same shoes, Inspector. You know I can always tell by the shoes. What's he want? Why don't he leave me alone? Why does he keep coming back and back?" Her questions floated back to Jury as they descended the flights of stairs to her rooms. It happened every 2 months. At first Jury had tried to convince her of the truth. There was nobody there. Mrs. Wasserman spent a lot of time watching the feet on the pavement, the bodiless feet and legs passing her window. It was the one pair of feet, of shoes, she had fixed on and claimed came back and back again to harass her. Stopping, waiting. She was terrified of the feet. Jury had tried to convince her that the feet weren't there, that he wasn't there, until it had last come home to him that he was upsetting her more. She needed to believe it. So over the past year, Jury had helped her make her flat as impregnable as a fortress. Heavier grillwork, deadbolt locks, chains, burglar alarms. But still, without fail, she'd be up at his door. Each time he did something. Another lock, another alarm, maybe. And each time she was flooded with relief. He had run out of ideas by now, though. She was watching him anxiously. He knew that if he hesitated too long, she would lose faith. Out of his pocket, he took a tiny round piece of metal and held it up. "Mrs. Wasserman, I really shouldn't do this. It's not legal, but I'm putting this on your telephone." He grinned, and so did she, sharing the secret. He picked up the base of the phone and attached the disc to the metal plate underneath. "There. Now, if anyone should bother you, just lift the receiver and push this metal disc to the side. It'll ring my phone upstairs. But look, only use it if you absolutely have to. An emergency, because it buzzes central, and I'd be in one hell of a jam." Relief flooded her face, and it was pathetic to see. He knew she wouldn't use it. It was only the reassurance she wanted, and he was safe again for another 2 months. "Oh, Inspector Jury, what would I do without you?" Quickly she walked over to the fireplace and took down a package from the mantel. She held it out to him. "For Christmas. Go on, go, open it." Jury undid the bit of ribbon and flimsy tissue. It was a book, quite beautiful, leather with gold tooling and a black silk marker. Virgil's Aeneid. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Wasserman. Thank you." "I saw you reading it one day at Angel, remember? I know you love to read. Me, I don't understand the deep stuff. It's all Greek to me." Jury smiled. "It's wonderful, Mrs. Wasserman. Really. Merry Christmas to you. You'll be okay now." As he climbed the stairs with his book, Jury thought, poor woman. That particular he who terrified her, from what vantage point had she seen his feet? Ground level? Mat level? Bed level? Had she had to look down in order to avoid looking up? It was better for Mrs. Wasserman that the feet stopped just beyond her grilled windows than that they should kick down the doors of memory. The English Inn stands permanently planted at the confluence of the roads of history, memory, and romance. The Man with the Load of Mischief was no exception. A half-timbered 16th-century coaching inn, through the archway of which Melrose Plant now drove his Bentley, parking it in the unused stable-yard. The proprietor, Simon Matchett, greeted them now at the front door, making a good deal of fuss over Agatha, but less over Melrose Plant, whom he afforded a nod and a smile, but the smile was not very broad. Melrose disliked him. He sensed in Matchett a climber after both wealth and position, a man of surface polish but underlying vulgarity. To be fair, Melrose wondered if he might not simply be jealous. Matchett's popularity with women could hardly be overstated, and his apparent attachment to Vivian Rivington disturbed Melrose. Perhaps even the tragedy in Matchett's past, something involving his deceased wife and another woman, might have added to the man's romantic image, like a scar on the face of a duellist. This had all happened so long ago that not even Lady Ardrey had been able to dig out the details. Melrose watched as his aunt and Matchett sauntered down the hall toward the saloon bar, ignoring him. Melrose started up the hall. On the right was the dining room. Twig, the elderly waiter, was doing his best to look overworked by fussing red napkins into empty water goblets and mumbling reprimands to Daphne Murch. Poor Murch could never do anything right, and that extended to finding dead bodies in the cellar. Agatha had seated herself. Matchett was lounging to her right. The diamond panes gave back the flickering lights of the monstrous stone fireplace across the room. Enormous logs spilled helter-skelter across its stone floor, unscreened. Unaware of its proximity to the gates of hell, Matchett's large dog, Mindy, was flopped on the hearth, dozing. As Twig set their drinks before them, Matchett said, "What do you think, Plant, about this business?" Melrose studied his cigar. "I suppose I agree with Wilde. Murder's a mistake. You shouldn't do anything you can't talk about after dinner." "How cold-blooded of you," Agatha began, but was interrupted by Matchett's rising to greet two people who had walked into the bar. "Here's Oliver and Sheila." Melrose watched his aunt try on several smiles. She loathed both Oliver and Sheila, but couldn't let it show. Although Melrose shared her dislike of mystery writer Oliver Darrington, he thought Sheila a pretty good sport. She was euphemistically described as Darrington's secretary, but all knew that she was his mistress. Sheila and Oliver drew up chairs, slung their coats across them, and seemed prepared to talk about the one subject Melrose was sick of. Sheila began. "Oliver's got a theory." "Only one?" said Melrose. Whether or not Melrose wanted to know or not, Sheila was leaning across the table, pouring out Oliver's theory. "That it's someone with a grudge against Long Piddleton. Someone that was wronged by the town, and the wound festered and festered, and he's seen a way to get his revenge. Oliver's writing a book, you know." Oliver Darrington interrupted. "Come on, Sheila, don't give it all away. You know I don't talk about works in progress." Simon Matchett tried to act the part of the perfect host. "That's an interesting theory, Oliver. Someone with a grudge. But surely he would have to be psychotic." "Well, good God, he must be in any event to go drowning people in beer and stuffing them up on wooden beams. The point is, these men were perfect strangers. Now, what possible motive—" A little fed up, Melrose put in, "You mean we've been saying they're strangers?" Simon Matchett lit a cigar. "I think he's saying that someone in Long Pid must have known them. So who do you think did it, then?" "Did what?" Melrose asked. Simon laughed. "The murders, old chap, since you seem to think it was someone in our fair town." Why hadn't he kept his mouth shut, Melrose wondered. Now he would have to go along with the little game. "You, probably," he said. They made, the group at the table, a rather nice little freeze. Hands stopped in mid-air, mouths dropped open, as if the hinges had stuck. Drinks paused at lips, cigarettes dangled. Indeed, the only one not locked in the still was Simon himself, who was laughing. Agatha said, "I find your sense of humour revolting, Melrose." "It's always worse on an empty stomach, dear aunt." Tuesday, December the 22nd. Detective Inspector Richard Jury and his companion, Detective Sergeant Alfred Wiggins, alighted from the 205 from London into a cloud of steam, on the other side of which came forth a figure, spectre-like. When the stream cleared, the figure transformed itself into Constable Pluck of the Northamptonshire Constabulary. Pluck was thin to the point of emaciation, but he had a cherubic, rosy face, made even rosier by winter's bite, so that he looked like an apple on a stick. But he was a good man, if a bit of a gossip. "Superintendent Pratt's waiting for you at the police station. He asked me to apologise for not meeting you personal, sir." "Quite all right, Constable," Jury said. Long Piddleton took the shape of a mounded row of limestone cottages to Jury's left, a field full of cows to his right. At the Long Piddleton police station, Superintendent Charles Pratt of the Northamptonshire Constabulary was waiting for them. "Must have thought in London we were going bonkers up here when you learned the circumstances." Jury continued reading the statement made by the vicar, Denzil Smith. "Quite honestly, I thought someone was kidding us. What's this about a girl named Ruby Judd?" According to the vicar, his housemaid had not returned from a visit to Wetherington, where her parents lived. "Ruby Judd. Ah, yes. I don't think it's anything to do with these murders. The thing is, Miss Judd is given to these extended vacations. Men, you know." "I see. Only it says here her parents haven't seen her at all. Is she still missing?" Pratt nodded. "I suppose she got to tell the vicar someplace respectable she's going. I don't know the girl, but, God, I do," said Constable Pluck with a lewd smile. "I see." But Jury didn't. The girl had been gone for nearly a week. Pratt blew his nose. "You know, of course, the Home Office has one of its labs set up in Wetherington. Everything there in case you need it." Jury lit up a cigarette from his crumpled pack of players. "What do you think, Superintendent? Would it be jumping the gun to say the victims, Ainsley and Small, had a connection with one another?" "I shouldn't think so, Inspector Jury. They both got themselves killed." After Pratt left, Jury sat at the desk studying the statements of the witnesses who had been present that evening at the Man with a Load of Mischief. His concentration was broken abruptly by the door to the small antechamber swinging open, and the appearance of Pluck and an elderly woman. There seemed to have been a brief scuffle.
"Sorry, sir," Pluck began. "It's Lady Audrey, sir."
"You needn't apologize, Sergeant," said Agatha. "The Inspector will want to talk with me. Obviously, Inspector, I haven't been wrestling with your dog's body here for the fun of it. It's you who should want to speak with me."
Agatha sat down, smoothed her skirt, and cleared her throat.
I was the one to discover the body, along with that girl, Murch. Took in every detail I could, because I thought it might be important later. Being a writer, I've got quite good powers of observation. After making my mental notes, I returned to the others.
"There were quite a few there, I understand," Jury said. "Would you like to give me a kind of sketch of those people who were present, Lady Audrey?" She would like nothing better.
"Now, besides myself and the servants, that'd be Murch and Twig, silly young girl and old waiter, quite palsied, senile, not a proper suspect, I shouldn't think. Then there's my nephew, Melrose Plant. You may have heard of my family. Descended from Baron Mount Audrey of Swalesdale. That would be about 1600 or so."
Jury interrupted. "My, that is an impressive lineage, madam, it really is."
"I know. And all handed to my nephew straight on a silver platter, and then the silly man gives it back."
"Gave it back? What reason did he give?"
"Reason? I don't know what he said. Something silly. One never knows what Melrose is talking about. I think he's quite mad sometimes."
"And the rest of the guests, Lady Audrey?"
"There's Oliver Darrington and Sheila Hogue. He writes rubbishy thrillers. Sheila's another one of those artsy-tartsy types, you know, blood-red fingernails and necklines down to there. Then Vivian Rivington, a poet, bit of a stick, subdued and long brown sweaters with pockets she's always got her fists in. That quiet type is always suspicious, don't you think? I know she's sweet on Melrose, though they say she's going to marry Simon Matchett. He's the owner of the Man with a Load of Mischief, and a dear boy. Vivian's not Simon's type at all. She's nobody's, as far as I can see."
Jury interrupted again. "Now, were there any other guests?"
"Isabel Rivington, Vivian's stepsister. Older than Vivian by 15 or more years, but looks as young. Or maybe it's that Vivian looks old, pale, mousy. Isabel's been taking care of Vivian ever since she was small. But it's Vivian who's got the money, or will do when she's 30, or when she gets married. Her father died in an accident. And Willie Bester Strawn. Willie must be a century old and rather dull. Pots around with the vicar a lot. Oh, yes, the vicar was dining there that night. Well, that's the lot. Oh, dear me, no. How could I forget our antiques dealer, Marshal Trueblood? Dear Marsha, as we call him. You know what I mean. Pink shirts and tinted glasses."
Jury let that go. "William Small came into the dining room while your party was in progress, didn't he?"
"I think I remember seeing him. Wasn't someone standing drinks for him? Marshal Trueblood?"
Jury doubted very much that she remembered anything that transpired before her grisly discovery of the body. "So there's nothing, really, you can add?"
No."
Jury rose. "Thank you, Lady Audrey." Since it was early closing, the jack and hammer was locked up tight. Jury made a tent of his hands and peered in the windows, but saw only shadowy shapes of tables and chairs. He moved back from the window and looked up at the wooden beam overhead, on which the body of Rufus Ainsley had been found. As Jury stared upward, a youngish man came to lounge in the doorway of the antique shop next to the pub. Jury assumed this to be its owner, and walked over. The shop was an attractive little building with Regency bow-front windows. Jury produced his identification. "Inspector Jury, Scotland Yard. Are you Mr. Trueblood?"
"Indeed I am. Come in, have a seat, do."
Trueblood indicated a settee that looked much too delicate for the likes of Jury.
Trueblood arranged himself in a fauteuil, his hands lightly folded on his knees. "Mr. Trueblood, you were at the Man with a Load of Mischief the night the first of these murders occurred?" "Indeed I was, Inspector. And do you know, I actually bought the man a drink." He let his forehead fall into his well-manicured hand, as if the drink in question might have been hemlock. "So, I understand. What did you talk about?" Trueblood's wide eyes behind the tinted glasses roamed around the room. "Do you know, we only talked about the weather. It had been snowing for 2 days and then pouring with rain that night. Well, the usual chit-chat." William Small didn't seem anxious, worried, anything like that. On the contrary, he seemed quite elated, as if he'd just got good news or won the pools. He said, "Let me tell you, mate, it ain't often a man has a run of luck like I done." The man was jubilant, but he wouldn't tell me what his run of luck was. "This was before dinner, was it? And you didn't see him after that? No one seems to have seen him for over 2 hours. "I think the poor dear must have been under the weather. He told me he was going up to his room, been drinking for 2 or 3 hours straight. I asked him where he was bound for, and he just laughed and said, 'I've arrived.'" "Interesting," Jury said. "Thank you for letting me take up your time this way. Incidentally, you wouldn't know the vicar's housemaid, Ruby Judd, would you?" Trueblood shifted uneasily in his chair. "I know her, yes. Doesn't everyone? Perhaps the closest thing we have to a lady of the evening. Mustn't be catty, must I?" Jury stopped at the front door. I wonder if Small meant it literally. "I've arrived." "Well, who could possibly mean to come here in dead of winter, Inspector? And a perfect stranger?" Perhaps he wasn't a perfect stranger. Goodbye, Mr. Trueblood. When Jury and Wiggins were shown into the saloon bar of the Man with a Load of Mischief, Simon Matchett was in close colloquy with a dark-haired, handsomely dressed woman, one of those whose ages is always a mystery. Jury understood easily how much Simon Matchett might appeal to women. Had Jury not known from Pratt's report that the man was 43, he would have put him at 10 years younger. Light brown hair, close curling, a squarish face, thin mouth, but amiable. This Miss Rivington was certainly not mousy and subdued. She wore a stylish dress of blue wool. A mink wrap was draped over the stool in front of her. Her eyes were dark, heavily done up with lavender shadow and mascara that beaded the tips of her lashes. Matchett introduced her as Isabel Rivington. She appraised Jury as she picked up the mink. "Well, I'm off. I'll see you later, Simon, notwithstanding any more murders." When she had gone, Jury asked Matchett to get the register. He found December the 17th, and the name of William T. Small, Esquire, written in rough hand. Matchett explained, "He came in that afternoon, around 3, I think it was." "And he didn't mention any particular reason for stopping here?" "No, Mr. Jury, he didn't." Matchett, Jury, and Wiggins went to the rear of the inn and down a short hall. The cellar was large, the half on the left taken up with crates and junk. The outside door was in the wall facing the bottom of the staircase. It would have been easy for someone to force the door, but why everyone seemed to believe someone had, Jury couldn't imagine. Jury walked over to the wine racks. Between the tiers stood large wooden kegs. Matchett pointed. "This is where Daphne found the body of Mr. Small, dangling. Is there anything else you'd like to see down here, Inspector?" "No, I think not. I'd like to speak to the waitress, if I may." The three of them trooped upstairs. Daphne Murch was laying out silver when Matchett led Jury into the dining room. "Daphne, this is Chief Inspector Jury, who's come up from London, and would like to ask you a few questions. I'll just be off, Inspector, but I'll be in the bar if you need me." Jury smiled one of his most heartwarming smiles. This one he meant, since the poor girl looked as if she might drop. "Miss Murch, may I call you Daphne? You handled yourself well, Daphne. Not many people could have kept such a cool head. It must have been an awful experience for you." "Oh, horrible, sir. Half in and half out of that keg he was. I couldn't hardly believe it. Like Guy Fawkes' night or something. Then I recognised it was Mr. Small, from the suit.
And what did you do?
Went running up them stairs again, and just as I got through the door, here came Lady Ardrey out of the loo. Excuse me, sir. She asked what was wrong, and I just kept pointing down them stairs. And then she went down, and pretty soon I heard this screech, and up she come like a herd of elephants, shouting at the top of her lungs. I run into the kitchen and put my head in my hands.
Jury reflected that Daphne Murch was probably the only one who had told him the plain, unvarnished truth so far. Wednesday, December the 23rd. Jerry glanced at the map Constable Pluck had made for him as he walked down the high street, at the X showing the Rivingtons' house. It was the large Tudor structure just on the other side of the bridge in the square. This morning, Isabel Rivington was looking just as elegant as she had yesterday. Miss Rivington, the night of the 17th, the night Small was murdered, do you recall seeing him in the bar before dinner?
If he was the one sitting with Marshal Trueblood, well, yes, I saw him, I suppose. But I didn't take much notice.
And you didn't go down to the wine cellar after his body had been found?
No, I'm a bit of a coward about that sort of thing.
Jury smiled. Aren't we all? Your sister did, though.
Vivian? Well, Vivian... And she's not my sister, exactly. We're step-sisters.
You are the trustee of your sister's estate? Jury asked.
Barclays Bank and I, Inspector. What's that to do with the murder of two strangers?
When does Vivian come into the money herself? Isabel's expression shifted from bored acquiescence to irritation.
When she's 30. Her father, my stepfather, was a bit of a chauvinist. Women can't handle money, that sort of thing. Actually, she could have got it any time she married, by the terms of the will. Otherwise, when she's 30.
Jury concluded that he had found a sore spot. And when will your stepsister be 30? Asked Jury. Angrily, Isabel stubbed out her cigarette.
Vivian will be 30 in about 6 months.
Vivian's father was quite wealthy, wasn't he? She turned her head sharply away and did not answer. There was some sort of accident, wasn't there? Miss Rivington's father? Isabel's brief recital was not very remorseful.
Yes, when Vivian was about 7 or 8. He was killed by a horse kicking him. He died instantly.
And her mother?
Died right after Vivian was born. My own mother died about 3 years after marrying James Rivington.
I see, Miss Rivington. Tell me about this accident to Vivian's father.
It was in Scotland one summer, when I was down from school. God, I hated it. The north of Scotland. Sutherland. An isolated, windy place. Nothing to do but count the rocks and trees and heather. They loved it, Vivian and James. Well, Vivian had this horse she especially liked, stabled with the others out back. One evening, Vivian and her father had an awful row, and she got so furious she just rushed right out in the dark and jumped on that horse, and James, came out after her. They were yelling at one another, and the horse shied and kicked her father in the head. Of course, Vivian was quite sick about the accident. I even think it might have unhinged her mind a bit.
You think your sister is psychotic, Miss Rivington?
No, I didn't mean that.
But she's certainly a recluse. All she does is sit and write poetry. Thank you, Miss Rivington. I'll be leaving now. As he followed her to the front door, Jury pondered the geography of Scotland, and something an artist friend of his had said about the quality of light there. There was something in her story of the death of James Rivington that sounded very fishy. Jury took a deep breath of fresh air and observed the imprint of his boots in the fine crust of new snow. He looked longingly at the sparkling expanse of whiteness which was the village square. As he crossed the road, he saw 2 children on the bridge. They looked about 8 or 9, and were rolling the fresh snow into balls along the grey stone balustrade. It wasn't until he'd gone another 50 feet and turned to look back that he realized they were following him. Trying to keep a straight face, he drew out his badge and displayed it. "Here, now, were you following me?" Their eyes widened into plates. Jury cleared his throat.
and in very official-sounding tones said, "I'd like to put a few questions to you, if you wouldn't mind coming along." The boy and girl stared at one another, their expressions mingling fear, puzzlement, and temptation. Temptation, of course, won out. They nodded, and one on each side of him, the three of them trampled along to the square. The snow was coming down a little more now, and the square was the most tempting length of unbroken snow Jury had ever seen. "What do you two know about identifying prints? Footprints? You don't happen to remember seeing any about the Jack and Hammer? About this size?" Jury planted his outsize Wellington firmly in the fresh snow layering the green. It made a delicious scrunch. He thought he might as well make it edifying. "Do you know the difference between the prints of a man running and a man walking?" Mystified, their small heads flicked back and forth. "Are you willing to help out the Yard in this matter, then?" Now their heads were bobbing up and down. Jury asked the boy, "Very well. What's your name?"
"James Double."
"Good. Now, what's yours?" But the girl only lowered her head and plucked at the hem of her coat. Then it must be James, too." "Very well. James and James. Listen carefully now. You, James, I want you to run as fast as you can up to that duck pond and wait. And you, James," and he put his hand on the girl's shoulder, "I want you to walk to the pond, making circles as you go." When Jury nodded, the boy took off, sending up clouds of snow behind him. The girl started walking very slowly and carefully, planting her feet firmly. Jury himself chose a smooth, unbroken expanse of snow. When he reached the pond, all three of them stood looking at their handiwork. "Excellent," Jury said. "Notice now, these tracks where you were running, and how only the ball of the foot hits the snow. And notice how one tends to lean to the outside when one goes around in a circle." Jury felt wonderful. He tried to wipe the smile from his face as he looked over all that fine, clear, glittering, unbroken white, now a crisscross of black marks and potholes. Jury held up his finger like a teacher gathering the attention of his class. "Always remember, when a murder's been done, there'll always be something odd, something funny, something that oughtn't to be there." How Jury wished that were true. Lady Agatha Ardrey was blowing on a cup of tea, grudgingly brought in by Riven. The kitchen at Ardrey End had even supplied some of the little cakes she was so fond of. She was watching Melrose Plant pour himself a glass of Coburn's very dark brown port. "Isn't this a bit early for spirits, Melrose?" Melrose yawned and corked up the bottle. "It's a bit early for anything, Agatha. Anyway, I gave Inspector Jury all of the interesting details on everyone who was at Matchett's Thursday night." Melrose glared at his aunt, who had come up his drive this morning at 8:30. He could barely keep his eyes open, having been up half the night reading. "That must have taken all of half a minute. Whom did you accuse, Agatha? I mean, besides me?" "Don't be conceited, my dear Plant. Not everyone is interested in your personal affairs. For some reason, Inspector Jury is asking all kinds of questions about the people who were there. Us, I mean. Why, I can't imagine. Not when what he should be doing is looking for some maniac before we're all dead in our beds." Melrose slid down in his brown leather wing chair and closed his eyes, hoping his aunt would take the hint. But no, she would go on spinning her sticky little theories like some old senile spider. "Melrose!" His eyes snapped open. "Gone to sleep on me again, have you? And here's Ruthven wants you for something." The butler closed his eyes in pain. For years Agatha had been mispronouncing his name. "Will you please learn to say his name properly, Agatha? Riven, not Ruthven. Riven." Riven announced, "There's a gentleman from Scotland Yard to see you, sir. Chief Inspector Richard Jury, his name is." "For heaven's sake, don't keep him standing out there, as Lady Ardrey is just going." Melrose could manage quite a vice-like grip when he wanted to. He got his aunt up and out of her chair, and had escorted her nearly to the door when she bellowed, "My watch! My watch! I've lost my watch!
And she pulled her arm free to go and search among the cushions. Melrose sighed, having lost another round. Jury was surprised to see Lady Ardrey rummaging through the furniture, but the moment he appeared she shot forward, her hand out.
Inspector Jury, we meet again!
As she pumped his hand, Jury observed the man standing in the middle of the room. He was tall and pleasant-looking, dressed rather informally in a Liberty silk robe, and tousled as if he had been pulled out of bed. What Jury noticed most, though, was the expression in the astonishing emerald eyes, over which Plant was now settling gold-rimmed spectacles. Sharp, very sharp. "My aunt was just leaving, Inspector. I'm Melrose Plant." Melrose gripped Agatha's arm firmly, planted her handbag under it, and steered her to the door. "I'll see you tomorrow, but not, please, at dawn. Not unless there's a duel on my front lawn." Then Plant turned to Jury. "Excuse me, Inspector, but my aunt's been here for 3 hours, and I haven't yet had breakfast. If you'd care to join me, we could talk while we ate." Riven appeared, took the order, and padded off to fill it. Melrose indicated a chair, the one his aunt had just vacated. "You want my impressions about Thursday and Friday evenings, yes? The reactions of everyone were pretty much standard. Throat-grabbings, eyeball-poppings. You make it sound a bit of play-acting, Mr. Plant." "Well, I admit I was wondering which one of them did it." Jury's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. "Then you assume it was someone in the inn?" "I thought it was obvious, Inspector." At the butler's entrance, Melrose rubbed his hands. "Ah, breakfast." "I've laid it for you in the dining room, sir." Beneath the fan-vaulted ceiling of the dining room hung enormous, rich portraits of the Ardrey Plant line. One, the smallest of them, was of Melrose Plant himself, seated at a table, a book open before him. "Conceited, isn't it? But my mother, before she died, insisted. Mr. Plant, you were saying that you didn't agree with the idea that Small's murderer forced his way in through the cellar door. What do you think?" "Given the meeting place, I'd say it was a spur-of-the-moment thing. Someone there was surprised by the appearance of Small, and during the course of that evening arranged to meet him in the wine cellar. That improvisational method of murder would testify to that. Or there is the possibility it was premeditated and made to look as if it weren't. And the grotesque detail of shoving Small's head in a keg of beer and stuffing Ainsley up there on the beam. Why? The weird touches are, well, too weird." And Jury smiled, since Plant had just outlined his own thoughts. "You mean because they direct our attention to the method, and away from something else, such as the motive, window dressing, that sort of thing? Or could one murder have been done to draw your attention from the other? Well, Inspector, you're faced with everyone there having an opportunity, but no one seeming to have a motive. It would be so much easier if the victim had been one of us." "Why is that, Mr. Plant?" "Because there are so many motives. Had it been me killed, good heavens, the possibilities are endless, beginning with my aunt. Had it been Aunt Agatha murdered, the entire village would be under suspicion. It wouldn't be the first time several people were killed in order to mask the real motive," said Jury. "Masking the real motive, Inspector? You don't think there'll be more murders?" "You yourself suggested there were several motives for murder in Long Piddleton," said Jury. Melrose swung around toward the dining-room door, on the other side of which was a great clattering and raising of voices. "Ah, but I wasn't really serious." Riven entered. "I'm sorry, sir. It's Lady Ardrey. Insists—" But before he could finish, or get out of her way, Agatha pushed through the door and sailed in, cape flying. "Well, I see you two are sitting here calmly eating kidney and bacon with the whole village in an uproar." "The village has been in an uproar for days, Aunt Agatha. Whatever brings you back?" Lady Ardrey planted her cane squarely in front of her. "What brings me back? To see if I can drag Chief Inspector Jury from his lunch. There's been another."
A murder at the Swan.
The Swan was a country inn less than a mile from Ardry End and several miles from Dorking Dean. When Jury, Plant and Agatha got there, 3 police cars were drawn up in the parking lot that fronted the inn. There were quite a few children there, too, waiting for blood and gore. Jury recognised the doubles among them and waved. "Where's the body, Wiggins? And who found it?" said Jury. "In the garden, sir. It was Mrs. Willipool, the owner, found him." Before he went in the door, Jury paused to look up at the inn sign, creaking slightly on its ironwood rod. The sign was faded, but it was still clearly a painting of a double-necked swan, each head gaggling off in a different direction. Across the top of the sign in graceful cursive lettering was the legend, "Swan with 2 necks." Jury said to Wiggins, "How on earth do they ever think of them?" Wiggins' voice was lost in the folds of his handkerchief.
What, sir?
"The pub names, Wiggins, the pub names." Jury and Wiggins stood looking down at the body sprawled across the white metal table. Beside the body was a half-drunk pint of lager. Wiggins asked, "Why'd he come out here in the cold to have his pint?" "Because he was supposed to meet someone, I imagine, Wiggins." Jury pointed to a book lying beneath the hand of the murdered man. "Well, well," said Jury. "Bent on Murder, by our very own Mr. Darrington of Long Piddleton." "That's something, that is," said Wiggins. "A red herring, do you think, sir?" "I wouldn't be surprised, Sergeant. Now, fill me in." Wiggins took out his cellophane-wrapped box of cough drops, and Jury waited patiently while he undid them and popped one into his mouth. "Name's Jubal Creed, sir. From his driver's licence we got that he lives in a town in East Anglia called Wigglesworth. That's in Cambridgeshire. Mr. Creed's been retired from the Cambridgeshire police for near 5 years. We found his car parked out in the lot. He stopped here last night, had his evening meal, and then breakfast this morning, and Mrs. Willipool said he come out here around 10:30 or a bit later." They had by now got a full report from the Cambridgeshire police on Creed's career, a career rather swiftly curtailed, Wiggins explained. "There's your regular mumping, and there's the kind of thing Mr. Creed pulled off. It wasn't bribery proper, but it was the next thing too. He'd almost got a nice little business going on the side, so they let him retire." Jury nodded and went down on one knee to examine Creed further. A red indentation around his neck, the slightly blued complexion and the bulged eyes told the story. The mark around the neck had probably been made with a wire, as in the case of Small. It had cut into the skin. There could not have been much of a struggle. "Wiggins, what the devil's this?" Jury pointed to what appeared to be a cut on the nose. It had recently bled. Jury reached down and pulled the man's face around. Not one cut, 2, as if a hand holding a razor had whipped twice across the bridge of the nose. The cuts were not deep, but still they sent a chill up Jury's spine. The practical joker again. But what was the joke? Jury turned up his coat collar and shoved his hands in his pockets. He looked at the scene of the crime. It was a walled-in garden, a courtyard perhaps about 50 feet square, partly cobbled where the tables were set up. To the left was an old stable block, part of which had been modernized to the inn's toilets. Jury turned and looked at the rear of the Swan. In such a public place, it was an oddly secluded spot. The rear door was the only danger point, since someone might have opened it. Were there any other guests, Sergeant?" "Not overnight, sir, but there was 2 from Long Piddleton stopped in around 11 when bar opened. Miss Rivington and Mr. Matchett." Jury raised his eyebrows. "Did they now? And which Miss Rivington?" "Vivian Rivington. Mrs. Willipool says they had lunch. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, sir?" Jury was a bit surprised to hear that Wiggins had been thinking at all. He usually left that to Jury. "What's that, Sergeant?" "That it's a regular locked room mystery, sir. Whoever did it must have come from inside the inn."
But Mrs. Willipool says that Mr. Matchett and Miss Rivington never left their table. And she could only know that if she was in the room too, seeing they didn't. So they all three have alibis. Very good, Wiggins. And since no one could have climbed that wall, nobody could have done this murder by your reckoning. Wiggins smiled broadly. Right, sir. Only somebody did now, didn't they? Go check the outside of that wall. Wiggins came back, looking pleased with himself. I found it, sir. It's the toilet. Wiggins pointed. They were standing on the outside of the wall, that part comprised of the converted stable block. It's not too hard. I just shoved the window in, crammed through it, and came out the door into the courtyard. Jury looked from the window down at the ground. The snow had nearly melted, and the ground was hard, not likely to make much of an impression. Jury hunkered down. He heard a psst from behind. He looked all around to determine the direction, and then saw a small head dart behind an oak. Jury watched the tree. The head darted out again, and another just above it. He marshalled his most authoritative voice. Come out of there! It worked, perhaps a little too well, for the double children appeared, their heads even lower than usual. Now, what are you doing out here, James? And James? The little girl started jumping up and down, barely able to contain her excitement, and the boy said, Tracks! He jabbed his finger back toward the woods. Just beyond the wall was a stand of oak, thickening into woodland beyond. James whispered excitedly as he tugged Jury along. We done just what you said, Mr. Jury. We look for anything funny. You said wherever there's a murder, there's bound to be something funny. The double children let Jury go, finally, and made a dash ahead of him through the trees. In the woods, the snow hadn't melted as much as it had near the wall of the Swan, and when he came up to them, James was pointing down at the imprint of a shoe or boot. A few feet farther on, there was another. In another 20 feet they had reached a small clearing where the ground was hard and rutted. James pointed back toward the Sidbury-Dorking-Dean road, screened by trees. Used to be an old road back here. Ain't no one uses it no more. Used to go round to Dorking. There were tire tracks. Jury looked up. James and James, you're brilliant. He got out his wallet. The Yard customarily gives rewards for this sort of thing. This discovery is, of course, not to be mentioned. He handed them each a £1 note. You get along home now, and be careful. I'll need you later. The doubles took off through the trees, but in a minute the boy was back, shoving something in Jury's hand. It's for you, sir. I whittled it myself. Then they both turned and waved frantically, and were gone. Jury looked at the present. It was a catapult, a very rough-hewn one, with a rubber band for the sling. He smiled, and he scuffed around through the snow looking for stones, turned up a few pebbles, and took some practice shots at the trees. Sheepishly, he looked over his shoulder to see if anyone might possibly have seen him. He shoved the catapult in his inside coat pocket and tramped back towards the Swan. At the Long Piddleton police station, Jury only half heard the door open and close behind him. It was the voice that made him turn. Inspector Jury, I'm Vivian Rivington. Your sergeant said I should just come in. Jury stood there, idiotically smiling, and unable to move. He had taken one look at Vivian Rivington, and promptly fallen in love. It was true, as Lady Ardrey had said. Vivian was wearing a dark brown sweater, belted. Her hands were, at that moment, nervously plucking the hem of the sweater. Her colouring was the colouring of an autumn day, one of those tawny brown, deep gold landscapes touched with russet. The hair was satiny, like taffy. The face was triangular, devoid of makeup. The eyes were amber with little flecks, bits and pieces of what looked like semi-precious stones. It was her aura, a mournful, sad quality, which came through paradoxically as a kind of radiance. For him, it was charismatic. Her small, embarrassed cough called him from great distances. Jury was trying to force himself to begin this interview. to say something when Wiggins stuck his head in the door to tell Jury that Mr. Matchett was here.
"Thank you, Sergeant. I'll see him in a moment."
Would you please stay and take notes, Wiggins? Miss Rivington, I'm Inspector Jury. Richard Jury. Please sit down."
"Thank you,"
Vivian said. Jury tried to soften up his expression. "Miss Rivington, you were in the Swan during the time, just before..." She lowered her gaze. "This man was killed, yes." "Could you please state your business there?" Jury asked. "Of course. I was having lunch. I met Simon Matchett there." Jury must have been frowning dreadfully. Vivian looked that worried. So he turned the frown on Wiggins.
"You getting this? All of it, Sergeant Wiggins?"
"I beg your pardon? Getting it, sir? Why, yes, of course." Jury nodded. "Just go on, Miss Rivington." "There's nothing to tell, really. Simon had to go to Dorking Dean, and we decided to meet for lunch at the Swan at 11. Jury was tearing up little bits of Constable Pluck's blotter.
"You arrived after Mr. Matchett. Together?"
"We drove our separate cars. Got there at the same time. Really, I couldn't believe... The thing is, this man must have been murdered when I was right there. I can't get over that. I really can't. Inspector, are you quite all right?" She was leaning toward him, looking concerned.
"I'm all right. Look, Miss Rivington, there are a number of questions I need to ask you, but right now I'd like to see Mr. Matchett. Show Miss Rivington out, Sergeant."
Wiggins rose, handkerchief and notebook in hand, and opened the door for Vivian, who, after looking at the inspector uncertainly, turned and walked out. Jury sank back into his chair and took several deep breaths. "You great nit," he said to himself. "You clod." Jury was still upbraiding himself when Simon Matchett walked in and took a seat. "I have the most uncomfortable feeling, Inspector, that I am going to be it." "It, Mr. Matchett?" "Oh, don't come over the innocent with me, Inspector. I know the superintendent must have passed along the information to you about my wife. How many other suspects have you with a murder in their past? I suppose everyone has something he'd rather not have hung out with the Monday wash, Mr. Matchett." Simon Matchett grimly studied his cigarette. "But not the murder of a wife, I dare say." "Let's talk about this particular murder, Mr. Matchett." Matchett said, "I find it strange the man would have stayed out in the garden all that time in the cold." "Well, he wasn't necessarily alive all that time, was he?" Matchett winced. "Am I attracting murders? This was the second time I seem to have been there when one was done." At least he was gallant enough not to include Vivian Rivington. "Tell me about your wife, Mr. Matchett." "Yes, of course. Well, we lived in Devon. She owned, several inns. The Goat and Compasses was one. That's where we lived. I thought it would be fun to put on the odd play or two in the inn yard. We used the gallery to seat people, too, when there were a lot, and there were a surprising number. It was successful. I did mention, didn't I, that I was an actor? It's how I met Celia, my wife. She fancied herself an actress and turned up in some summer production in Kent. Probably her father bought her the role. He had a lot of money, mostly in property. All those inns, you see. 2 others, the Iron Devil and the Bag of Nails. When Celia took them over, she kept a very tight rein on the purse strings, believe me. I'm not going to gloss over the fact there were many reasons for my dissatisfaction with the marriage. I hated her after 5 years of it. I wanted out. We had some awful rows, I can tell you. And so could the servants. And did tell the police. Why didn't you leave her, Mr. Matchett? Well, I was going to. That was when Harriet Gethvin-Owen came along. She was lovely, really lovely. And another amateur actress. One thing led to another, the old story, which gave me even more reason to leave Celia. During this one summer, we were doing Othello. Harriet played Desdemona. Celia suspected something between us, and took to keeping a little office just across the corridor from the stage. On the night she was killed, the maid, Daisy something, had brought Celia her usual hot drink. Not more than half an hour later, the cook, Rose Smollett, came to retrieve the tray and found Celia slumped over her desk. She was dead. The desk was gone through, the safe open. It was finally put down to person or persons unknown. As you can well imagine, I was the prime suspect, wasn't I? If I hadn't been on stage when Celia was killed, I'm quite sure I'd have been in the dock. And Harriet, too, perhaps. But it wouldn't do. The play was going on at the time. Afterwards, Harriet just left, went to the States. The publicity, I suppose. She was a sensitive person, rather retiring. Well, that's 16 years ago. Sleeping dogs and all that. At least, I hope it will lie still, but somehow I doubt it. Jury tried for as casual a tone as possible. Now, what about these rumours you're engaged to Miss Rivington? Vivian, that is. Let's say I've asked her to marry me, yes. But that's far from her accepting. Who knows what goes on in women's minds, Inspector? I see, said Jerry. Well, I suppose that's all for now, Mr. Matchett. I'll be in touch. As Matchett was leaving, Melrose Plant entered. I think you should come along to the vicarage, Inspector. The vicar has some information that might be relevant. He was outside the Swan before we got there, and he heard the policeman say something about the condition of the body. Jerry was up and putting on his coat. What about the body, Mr. Plant? The vicar says he'd heard the man's face was cut up a bit, on the nose. Well, the vicar knows what it means, or so he says. The Reverend Denzil Smith was pointing to a picture in a book of inns. Jury marvelled at the inventiveness of the sign painter, or whoever had thought up the double-necked swans. It's a corruption of the real meaning, you see, Inspector. It used to be that the royal birds were marked by cutting small notches into their bills, and the vintners did that sort of thing too, I understand, so that the ownership of the swans could be distinguished by the nicks. So, you see, it would really have been a swan with two nicks. But what you see here is the work of some illiterate sign painter, who either couldn't read or couldn't spell. Jury still looked at the picture. Good Lord. So the murderer nicked Creed. Probably another red herring. The vicar, having got the stage for the moment, was not about to relinquish it. There are other examples of corruptions of the original meaning. Just outside Wetherington, there's the Bull and Mouth. Never guess where that comes from, would you? It's the sign made up to commemorate the taking of Boulogne Harbour by Henry VIII. The mouth of the harbour. Boulogne Mouth. Did you know Hogarth painted the original sign for the Man with a Load of Mischief? There are quite a few inns by that name. Not so many as there are bells, of course. Must be 500 of those in England. Outside Dorking there's the Bag of Nails. That's a popular name. Originally it was the Devil and the Bag of Nails. Jury tried to divert the vicar's attention from etymological absurdities to their own more pressing murders. I certainly do thank you for this bit of information, Vicar. I can't imagine any one of us, and the police, would have hit on it. The vicar beamed. Jury went on. You were at the Man with a Load of Mischief on Thursday night, and I just wanted to ask you a question or two about it. The vicar had been with his friend, Willie Bister Strawn, playing draughts between 9 and 10. Terrible thing, terrible. I can't imagine this happening in Long Piddleton. I've been here 45 years. My wife died 9 years ago, God rest her, but Mrs. Gaunt has been doing for me very nicely, together with Ruby. Ruby's been gone longer than usual. The vicar looked puzzled. About this Ruby Judd, Jury asked. I understand she was due back, but hasn't turned up. When did she leave, exactly? It was Wednesday, I believe. Good heavens, a week ago, Inspector. How time does fly. She asked my permission to leave for a few days to visit her people in Wetherington. I see. Is there a picture of Ruby somewhere? The vicar again looked puzzled. He called in Mrs. Gaunt, skeletal and unhappy-looking, every inch her name, to go up to Ruby's room and fetch down a picture. The vicar lowered his voice to a whisper. Mrs. Gaunt isn't too pleased with Ruby.
Says she's always sitting about reading film magazines. Or when she's supposed to be sweeping down the church, Mrs. Gaunt has caught her sitting down in a pew. She was putting lacquer on her fingernails. Mrs. Gaunt was back in double time, tight-lipped, with 2 snapshots. The vicar passed them over to Jury. But you're not thinking something's happened to Ruby, are you? You might ask Daphne Murch. She and Ruby are quite thick. Indeed, it was the Murch girl who suggested Ruby to me. Jury put the snaps in his wallet. You don't seem worried yourself, Vicar. Well, she's gone off once or twice before. My guess is a boyfriend. Ruby's not a bad girl, but like so many of these young people, she's a bit flighty. Jury interrupted. This business about the nicks on the Swan's bills, that sort of thing is hardly common knowledge. Have you mentioned it to anyone else around here? The vicar turned a bit red. I must admit, I do rather enjoy talking about the histories of these old places. Yes, I'm sure I mentioned it to this or that person. I can't remember, really. Jury got up. Thank you for your help, sir. Now I must be going. Thursday, December the 24th. The next morning, Jury was sitting at Constable Pluck's battered wooden desk, Wiggins looking over his shoulder. They were studying Darrington's book, Bent on Murder, and its sequel, lying side by side. Jury would run his finger along a line of one, then shift to the other. There's a tremendous difference in the quality of these two. One seems a clumsy imitation of the style of the other. I don't think Darrington wrote Bent on Murder. I think he was trying to copy the style and botched it in the second book. Whoever wrote the first book also wrote the third, Bent Takes a Holiday. It presents the interesting possibility that someone else might have known about this plagiarism and decided to blackmail Darrington. Like William Small, you mean, sir? Said Wiggins. How would Ainsley and Creed come into it? I'm simply going to put it to Mr. Darrington directly. See what happens. Oliver Darrington's house looked just the sort of thing a moneyed writer might choose, secluded and Elizabethan. The woman who answered the door was, by anyone's standards, dishy. I'm Sheila Hogue. Long O, please. You're the police, aren't you? Come in. Jury followed her through to the living room. Oliver Darrington was handsome, but with a profile a little too Greek, features a bit too chiselled, and like a statue he seemed chilly and unbending. Darrington started talking the moment he saw Jury. What in hell is this? About a copy of my book in the hands of this man who was found dead at the Swan. Jury made him wait while he lit a cigarette. There are just a few questions I wanted to ask first, Mr. Darrington. Sheila pushed some newspapers and magazines from the couch and invited Jury to sit. What time did you and Mr. Darrington arrive at the Man with a Load of Mischief the evening Mr. Small was killed? 9, I think. 9:30. Drunk as lords we both were. And Rufus Ainsley? You were both at the Jack and Hammer the night Ainsley was murdered? Darrington spoke. Yes. Sheila left a bit before I did. We had, misunderstanding over my buying Vivian Rivington a drink. Jury smiled. You obviously have got the news already that another man has been murdered, and I was wondering if you could tell me where you were between 10 and a little past noon yesterday. Right here. Sheila was with me. Jury held out the Darrington books. Your books are rather interesting, especially in their differences. As a matter of fact, I was thinking you might have had a bit of help there. Jury put it so mildly that even he was surprised when Darrington wheeled on Sheila. I didn't tell him, Oliver, honestly. Oh, hell, there's one charade over. You might as well tell him, Sheila. It was my brother, Michael. He was killed in a motorcycle accident. When I was going through his things after he died, I found the letter that Oliver had written him about his book. I didn't even know my brother had written a book, much less that he was trying to get it published. Anyway, I went along to Oliver's firm, I suppose with the intention of somehow seeing the book got published as, I guess, a nice memorial.
Oliver was very sympathetic, and we had lunch and talked about Michael's book, how good it was. Then we had dinner, then lunch, then dinner, until... Well, I fell for him, which was his intention, wasn't it, love? There was another manuscript. Oliver read it and said it was just as good as the first. The temptation was too much for him. He could publish the first under his own name and put the other away for a rainy day. There it is, rotten, nasty. What can I say? Oliver raised his face.
Wait a minute now, Inspector. What has all this to do with the man found this morning?
You didn't know him, Mr. Darrington?
Damn it! Of course I didn't know him.
Funny. He was an admirer of yours, said Jury. That book, you know. Or perhaps not an admirer after all. There's always blackmail, you know, as a motive for murder.
I suppose my book in his hands just ties it up for you, doesn't it?
The book is one thing that suggests you didn't kill him. For you to leave a clue in the hands of the murdered man, one which points back to you, only a very daring person and one with iron composure would dare such a thing. And in you, Mr. Darrington, I haven't seen any of those qualities. Sheila burst out laughing. Melrose Plant tooled along the Sidbury Road. As the long sweeps of sun-starred meadow rolled by him, Melrose slid down in the seat of the Bentley and wondered if he had an unconscious hankering to be a detective. It was possible that all of these murders were only leading up to another, the rather shuddery prospect put forth by Jury. The darkness that swept over his mind seemed projected in the sign ahead of him, a small one with a black spot across the Cock and Bottle, coming up on his left. Plant lifted his foot from the pedal and slowed to a crawl, so that he wouldn't rip out his muffler going over the narrow rise of mounded earth meant to slow down cars for the upcoming turn. It was, appropriately enough, called a dead man. Something flashed in the strong sunlight as he approached the rise. Bumping over the dead man, he peered out of his window and saw that the reflection had come from something lying there in the dirt, a bit of glass, probably. Then suddenly a picture of what he'd actually seen froze in his mind, and he braked so hard he nearly threw himself through the windscreen. Melrose sat there for a few seconds, telling himself that the dirt-covered object couldn't have been what he thought it was. A ring. But had it really been attached to a hand? While Sheila Hogue still laughed, Jerry was pulling on his coat. As if cued for its entrance, the telephone rang. Sheila called to him. "It's for you, Inspector." "Jury here." He listened with growing amazement to the words of Melrose Plant. "Look, Mr. Plant, just you stay right there." He slammed down the receiver and dialed the Long Piddleton station. Jury told Pluck to get a hold of the scene of crimes officer and the pathologist and get them over to the Cock and Bottle without delay. When Jury saw the Cock and Bottle, he swerved over onto the right shoulder and braked just before the rise of mounded earth. He ran over to the spot where Melrose Plant was kneeling. The rise had been covered with a tarpaulin. Protruding from the hard, snow-encrusted mound was a hand and an arm. The nails of the hand were painted an incongruous bright red, and a large cheap ring encircled one finger, stiff as an icicle. The police pathologist, Dr. Appleby, waited patiently, smoking, as the scene of crimes officer recorded every detail. The marks of ligature were plainly visible on the victim's neck, and the victim was, as Jury had suspected, one Ruby Judd, lately the vicar's housemaid. "Dr. Appleby, the facts, please." "Very well. From the condition of the body, I'd say she's been dead anywhere from 3 days to a week. A little difficult to tell. The body's fairly well preserved. Cause of death? Strangulation. This time by a knotted cord of some sort." Having supervised the moving of the body, Appleby snapped his bag and moved off. On either side of the road, detective constables were combing the cold meadows for further evidence. Jury was hoping some sort of bag, a suitcase perhaps, would turn up in the woods or the meadow near the Cock and Bottle. He imagined that whoever murdered her had got her to pack up a bag, probably under the pretense of a weekend of passion, knowing that no questions would be asked for at least a few days. It was a cold, cold trail. But Jury had been right about one thing. Ruby Judd was no stranger. The vicar looked even greyer than his years. "I can't understand it, Inspector. Why would anyone want to kill that poor, harmless girl? Couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. 24 she was, Mr. Smith, and perhaps not quite as innocent as we might like to believe. The point now is that we may have to go over some of the same ground again. Her murder throws altogether a different light on matters. As I told you before, Inspector, it was Daphne Murch who got the girl for me. They were good friends, I think. If anyone would know why she left, it might be Daphne. To think this is what it was all leading up to, these murders. The murder of that poor girl." "Leading up to? Now I think you've got it the wrong way round, Vicar. Ruby was murdered before any of the others. Did you ever suspect that Ruby knew something about someone in the village here? Something they'd rather not have known?" "Blackmail? Is that what you're suggesting, Inspector?" Jury didn't answer. "She chattered on a lot, but I didn't always listen, though there was a bit of talk about Ruby and Marshal Trueblood." Jury and Wiggins exchanged disbelieving glances, and Wiggins nearly choked. When Jury walked into the saloon bar of the Man with a Load of Mischief, he found the waiter, Twig, polishing up glasses. "Where's Mr. Matchett, Twig?"
"He's having drinks in the dining room before dinner, sir."
Jury started to get up.
"With Miss Vivian."
Jury sat back down again. He was a policeman. He should be in there asking questions. He forced himself to pick up a glass of brandy and head to the dining room. At first, Jury thought it was empty. Then he saw them, Simon Matchett and Vivian. They were nearly hidden by the stone buttress of one of the alcoves. Then he caught the tag end of something Matchett was saying. "Where we live, darling." And then Vivian said, "Couldn't live here, Simon. Not any longer. And now, even poor Ruby Judd, my God." Vivian pulled her sweater closer around her, helped by Matchett. "Good Lord, love, no more could I. Ireland. We'll go to Ireland, Viv. I want peace as much as you do, my dear. Look, this place will fetch a very good price, and I can buy something over there with the profits, a pub, maybe, or become a gun runner, anything to keep us going." There was a brief silence. Vivian spoke. "I shouldn't really think we'll have to worry too much about being kept." "Give it up, Vivian." "Give what up?" "The money. Give it to charity or something. You don't need it, and I don't want it. And as far as I can see, it's doing nothing but causing misery, at least to me. My Lord, you won't even let me tell anyone about us. You won't even share Christmas Day with me." Vivian laughed. "Oh, Simon, you're being childish. I promised Melrose ages ago." "He's probably the only man you've ever known you're sure isn't a fortune hunter. If I had half his money, you'd marry me tomorrow." As he tried to press himself farther into the darkness, Jury had the unreal sensation he made an audience of one watching a performance in a theatre. Simon was saying, "Cleopatra, you remind me of." "Well, that's going a bit far, isn't it, Simon?" "Not for you. And Dido. Ah, Dido, Queen of Carthage. Remember what she said when she first saw Aeneas?" "I blush to say that I don't," said Vivian. "Are you casting yourself as Aeneas?" "Certainly. Agnosco veteris vestigia flammae. She says—" "I recognize," said Jury, looking squarely at Vivian, and setting his glass heavily on the table, "the vestiges of an old flame." They stared up at him, open-mouthed. Then both spoke at once. "Inspector Jury!" "Sorry. Didn't mean to creep up on you like that. You were engrossed." Vivian gave a little gasping laugh. "Oh, don't apologize. I'm a bit overwhelmed to be in the presence of such learned men. Sit down, do." Jury pulled out a chair and lit up a cigarette. "Not me. It's just a great line, that's all. What man in his right mind could resist it?" Vivian was smiling at him, but he looked away. "Or woman either, Inspector. It's a beautiful line." "Well, we haven't much time for beauty, have we, then?" he said somewhat over-briskly. "We seem to have another murder on our hands. You may have heard by now. News travels fast." Jury saw Vivian look away quickly, and down at the tablecloth like a chastened child. "Ruby Judd, yes." "We were just talking about it,"
said Matchett. Oh, weren't you just, thought Jury. Twig rolled in the salad table.
We were just about to have dinner, Inspector. Won't you join us?
Yes, thanks. Expertly, Matchett dribbled oil around the bowl and began tossing the contents with a wooden fork and spoon. Where were both of you Tuesday a week ago, in the evening? Matchett went on calmly, breaking an egg over the lettuce, but Vivian looked nervous as she said, At home. I can't remember. Simon? Matchett shook his head. Can't say offhand. No, wait. I was here, I remember, all afternoon and evening. Don't you ever go off duty, Inspector? Matchett grated fresh cheese over the greens and tossed in a handful of croutons. I would do, if only our murderer would do the same, Jury said. Matchett passed over 2 glass plates of salad. When Jury sampled his, he found it delicious. There must not be many men who could discuss a fresh murder, mix a Caesar salad, and be the intended of this lovely creature, Vivian Rivington. Whatever he wasn't simple, Simon. It was an hour later, and Jury and Daphne Murch were sitting at the same table in the dining room. Matchett had left to take Vivian Rivington home. Daphne had wadded up and discarded a whole pocketful of tissues from all of her crying since Jury had told her about Ruby. Jury pulled the picture from his wallet and placed it between them on the table. Ruby had long black hair, a pretty, vacuous face. How long had you known Ruby, Daphne?
Oh, for years. I knew her in school. When the vicar's housemaid took herself off to get married, and there was only that Mrs. Gaunt from the village to do for him, an old poker she is, I asked him would he like another girl. He said to send her along. I guess I should have thought twice about it, sir. I mean, sir, with her not being the most dependable person in the world. Ruby'd been in 1 or 2 little scrapes, see.
Jerry was fully aware the scrapes were probably sexual. Then you and Ruby were pretty thick.
In a way, yes, sir. But the stuff she'd tell me, it was more like by way of teasing me into asking her questions, not like she was really confiding in me. Ruby wasn't walking out with anyone round here I knew of, but she was always dropping hints. She'd more'n one fellow she was...
Jury finished her sentence. Sleeping with, you mean? Daphne nodded.
The thing is, Ruby always acted that way, secretive-like, whether there were anything in it or not. She wanted to make a big mystery out of everything, and she had this gold bracelet she always wore, always had it on her. My, but didn't she set great store by that. First it's somebody gave it to her, and later on it's that she found it. You never knew when Ruby was telling the truth. Then there was all the stuff she was trying on with that Mrs. Gaunt. When she was supposed to be sweeping the church, she'd just sit out there and write in her diary.
Ruby kept a diary? Did you ever see it, Daphne?
Oh, no, sir. Not her being so secretive, the way she was. The one thing Ruby did say that really made me wonder was as how she'd got something on someone in Long Pid. I was really curious about what she did mean, and I kept trying to worm it out of her, but the harder I tried, the more she laughed, and just kept saying what a surprise it would be, that she had somebody on a piece of string, and wouldn't we all be half surprised?
Jury sighed. It would be hard with a girl like Ruby Judd to separate out the wheat from the chaff. Her secret could be anything from seeing one of the local ladies pull down her knickers for the milkman to murder. Friday, December the 25th. When Jury awoke on Christmas morning, the folder on Celia Matchett's murder was on the floor. He retrieved it and spent a good hour going through the loose pages. Jury replaced the papers in the folder. God, 2 days ago he had only 2 murders to solve. Here it was Christmas morning, and he had 5. Through these meditations, he heard the brrr, brrr of the telephone.
Jury here. I'm at the Long Pid station, sir.
Wiggins had begun referring to the village in the affectionate diminutive.
Now, this Mrs. Gaunt said she'd often seen Ruby write in a book. She said it was small and dark red. Said she didn't remember when she last saw Ruby writing in it.
All right, Wiggins. Now there is some information I want. Ring up C1 and have them go through the obits for an accidental death that occurred roughly 22 years ago in Scotland. Sutherland, to be exact. James Rivington was the name. I'm particularly interested in the exact time of his death.
Very good, sir. Merry Christmas.
Jury sat there feeling a little ashamed of himself. He supposed that for a long time he had been underestimating Wiggins, who certainly did his job as long as his health could hold out. Well, he was always there, with his pen and cough drops. Jury thought Wiggins was probably looking forward to his Christmas dinner with Constable Pluck and his family. And Jury was certainly looking forward to his, with Melrose Plant, and family. But first, he would have to stop by Marshal Trueblood's. It being Christmas, Trueblood's shop was closed, so Jury went round to his cottage, situated in the village square. Trueblood was just putting the finishing touches to his toilette, and could it be called anything else, preparatory to dining with the Bicester Strawns. Jury looked around for a place to sit, but every bit of furniture looked too precious to carry his weight. I assume you've heard by now about Ruby Judd?
God, yes. The one who did the Moonlight Flit.
I think she was seduced away by someone. The murderer probably suggested she pack up a bag to make her absence more acceptable. Otherwise there might have been questions asked. Trueblood lit up a small cigar.
The sort that are being asked now, I take it. And you want to know where I was on the night in question. Whatever night that might have been, say I, innocently.
Yes, but that's only one question. The other is, what was your relationship with Ruby Judd?
My relationship? Surely you're jesting.
Were you or were you not sleeping with Ruby Judd? Trueblood's direct answer threw Jury off balance.
Yes, but only the once, mind you. Well, she was rather a cute piece of baggage, but deadly dull. Mindless. Now, look, darling, you're not going to let this get around, are you? It would simply ruin my reputation. My business would go down the drain. Silly little twit, Ruby was. But what's one to do in a one-eyed village like this?
I think she was blackmailing someone, said Jury.
Me?
As a matter of fact, I don't think it was you. But I may take you in anyway just to get some proper answers.
Oh, very well. I'll try to remember if the girl said anything that might help. But she had so little to say one would want to listen to. She did say her mother was an old stick, and her father on the hob, but mostly falling off. Gin. Then there was his aunt and uncle in Devon, where she spent most of her ill-trained childhood. Aunt Rose and Uncle Will.
Where were you on the night of December 15th, Tuesday, Mr. Trueblood?
All by my lonesome, dear. Where were you?
Riven was standing at Jury's elbow, offering an enormous silver platter on which rested the remains of two birds, still in their adornments of cherries and truffles. But it hardly registered on Jury, whose eyes were on Vivian Rivington, seated across the table from him. Her amber hair curled above her grey cashmere sweater, and she looked as if she had materialized out of the mists of Yorkshire's West Riding. Melrose said to Riven, "That small package up there on the mantel, hand that over to her ladyship, will you?" Agatha's face brightened as she took the present and opened it. Vivian gasped when Agatha drew from the small box a bracelet of emeralds and rubies. Jury had not seen the real thing since he was very young, working in the robbery division. He knew now why rubies were described as blood red. Suddenly a missing detail floated into his mind. Rubies. Ruby. A bracelet. That was it. That image of the wrist sticking out of the ground. Ruby's wrist, but no bracelet. Daphne's voice came back to him. "She always wore it, sir, never took it off." Then where was it? His mind was still so much on Ruby's naked wrist that he barely heard Agatha's comment. "Quite handsome, Melrose, for paste." The ladies retired to the drawing-room, leaving Melrose and Jury to their port. "There are a few ideas I'd like to toss around with you regarding these murders, Mr. Plant. What intrigues me is their flamboyance. What sort of mind would think them up? A very cool one, Mr. Jury. The killer is being horribly public about it all. I see you thought of that too. The purloined letter idea. You hide something in plain sight. And since the murderer isn't hiding bodies, well, maybe he's trying to obscure the motive. Agatha popped back into the dining room just then to hear what was going on, her excuse being she needed a drop of brandy for her splitting headache.
"Just get me some, won't you, Ruthven?"
Riven, who had just come at that moment to clear the sideboard, turned haughtily. "My name is pronounced Riven, madam. Riven, as his lordship has so often told you." Riven started for the kitchen, tray in hand. Agatha was open-mouthed. Melrose, who thought he had caught a whiff of the cold malt on Riven's Christmas breath, grinned.
"Consider, Agatha, you've been shriven by Riven."
She whirled and stomped out. Jury picked up the topic Agatha had interrupted.
"Then there's Simon Matchett."
Melrose's green eyes gleamed.
"Isn't that just? I only wish I knew more about his wife and all that sordid business to toss up to Vivian, the silly girl. It's her sister Isabel's doing, that so-called engagement to Simon Matchett. Been pushing them together, though I swear I can't see why. Not the way Isabel looks at Matchett. Damn puzzling."
Jury chose to study his plate. "Not if... What do you think of that story of the accident to Vivian's father?"
"Funny you should ask," Melrose said, "because I've often wondered about that. She was only, 7 or 8 when he died. Vivian paints in all of the details of what happened as if it were yesterday. I'm just wondering, you see, Mr. Jury, who's been filling in the brushstrokes."
"You mean she might have had the picture painted for her by Isabel, Mr. Plant?"
"Well, who else is there?"
"Then there might have been some need for Isabel to convince Vivian of the accident, and that might give Isabel a motive for covering up her past."
"You don't honestly think a woman could have done these murders?"
"You're such a sentimentalist, Mr. Plant." Jury asked to use the telephone, and Melrose Plant went into the drawing-room to join the ladies. Jury apologized for dragging Constable Pluck from his Christmas dinner, but said he had to speak with Wiggins.
"Yes, sir?" "Listen, Wiggins, when you're through with dinner, I'd like you to get on to the police in Dartmouth and run down a list of names for me."
Then Jury read off the list, all of them either guests or help at the Goat and Compasses 16 years before. There was a snapping sound in Jury's ear, and then a crunch. Wiggins must be eating a stalk of celery. He mumbled that he'd get onto the list as soon as possible. As Jury entered the room, Agatha was arranging her skirts. Vivian rose.
"Melrose, it's been a wonderful dinner, but I do have to be going." "Good God, why?" "Dear Aunt, you trudged up here with Vivian. Are you going to let her go on her own?" "I dare say Vivian is old enough to take care of herself. Inspector Jury can give her a ride."
Jury helped Vivian into her coat, and Melrose saw them to the door.
"Really, Mr. Jury, it's hardly sporting of you to take off Vivian and leave me with Agatha."
"I've never been known for my sporting blood, Mr. Plant." When the two reached Vivian's house, Jury was quick to let her know this wasn't a social call. "I wanted to ask you a few questions." Jury sat on the armchair opposite the couch, almost afraid to get too comfortable. "First of all, I understand you're engaged to Simon Matchett." Yes, I suppose that's true. I'm not really decided. I don't think I love him." The furnishings Jury had not really noticed before suddenly began to glow like jewels in the dark. "If you don't love him, why marry him? If you don't mind my asking." "One gets tired of living one's life alone, and he does seem to care for me." "What an absolutely insipid reason for marrying." "Well, really, Inspector Jury. And what reasons would you allow for marrying?" "Passion, besottedness, sex, if you like, not being able to keep your hands off someone, or think about anything else, caring. What a bloody washed-up word that is. Haven't you ever felt any of those things?" For a moment She just looked at him. "I'm not sure. But apparently you have." Jury thought for a moment. "You were very fond of your father, weren't you, Vivian? According to Isabel, you had got angry with him and run out of the house to the stables and jumped up on your horse. Do you actually remember doing that?" "Getting sloshed together?" Isabel asked. Both of them turned around in surprise. Neither had heard her come in. She stood in the doorway among the melting shadows there, looking mysterious and very handsome. "How are you this evening, Chief Inspector Jury?" Jury rose and bowed slightly. "Fine, thank you, Miss Rivington. I must be going." Vivian walked with him to the door, and as he started down the path, she called, "Wait!" Then she dashed back into the house and returned with a small book, which she held out to him. "I don't know if you like poetry." "I like poetry, yes," he said. "This is yours?" She seemed to be looking all around, everywhere but at him, clearly embarrassed. "Yes, it's mine. That was published 3 or 4 years ago. It didn't sell like hot cakes, as you can imagine. Of course, you don't have time, I suppose, to read anything but police reports. But there aren't many poems there, actually. I don't write all that many. I mean, I find it hard to read even one." "I'll find the time." Jury spent the night in bed, reading Vivian's poetry. The poems were certainly not the work of a weak-minded young woman who lets herself get pushed about, or who would let herself be talked out of marrying the man she wanted to. And then he suddenly thought, perhaps the trouble was that Melrose Plant did not want to marry Vivian Rivington. The book of poems fell from his hands as he went to sleep, wondering how anyone could not want Vivian Rivington. Saturday, December the 26th. Sergeant Wiggins told Jury over breakfast that he had rung up the yard as soon as he had talked to Jury yesterday, and they turned up the addresses of 2 of the former servants at the Goat and Compasses. "Daisy Trump and Will Smollett, sir. They seem to be the only members of the staff 16 years ago who are still around. I can try and ring up this Trump woman and Smollett and arrange for you to see them." Jury helped himself to more kippers. "Absolutely. It was Daisy and Rose Smollett who figured most in finding Mrs. Matchett's body. Also, I made a few notes here about Mr. Rivington." Jury read over the sparse facts and found there not much addition to what Isabel and Vivian had told him, except that they gave the exact time of the accident, which was what Jury found so interesting. "Thanks very much, Sergeant. You did a damn good day's work, and I'm sorry I spoiled your Christmas dinner." Wiggins would rather have a commendation from Jury than a Christmas dinner any time. He smiled, but the smile was cut off abruptly by a coughing fit. He excused himself to go upstairs and spray his throat. "Tell Daphne Murch I'd like to see her, will you?" Daphne appeared shortly after. "I just wanted to talk to you for a minute, Daphne. There are 2 articles, things that belonged to Ruby, that haven't turned up, and it seems to me they should have. That bracelet and her diary. Now, you said she never took the bracelet off, right? She wasn't wearing it when we found her." "Well, that's ever so odd, that is. Especially if she was going somewhere. Maybe the clasp broke or something. I remember not long ago, it wasn't nothing, I guess. It was up in her room at the vicarage. Well, we were fooling around, having a pillow fight, actually, and we were really slugging away at each other so hard Ruby rolled off the bed and right under. That set us to laughing fit to kill. I reached down and tried to grab her, and she held my wrist so hard my bracelet came off. The clasp on it's not very good. Then, as I was laughing and trying to get it back, she rolled out from under the bed and said, 'That's funny.' I remember that clear as a bell. 'That's funny.' Well, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She just sat there holding my bracelet and looking like she'd come over queer. Then she kept looking at her bracelet, and she said, 'I just thought I'd found it.' I told her to stop acting the fool. She got up then, but just sat down on the bed and kept shaking her head.
And it wasn't long after that she started this business about knowing something, about having someone on a string.
What did the bracelet look like, Daphne?
Nothing special, just a charm bracelet. I do think the charms were real gold, though. I remember there was one of those tiny cubes with a quid inside it, and a tiny horse, and a heart, and some others I can't remember. You think what's happened to Ruby had something to do with that bracelet?
Jerry sat in the lounge of the Man with a Load of Mischief, waiting for Melrose Plant. He checked his watch. 8:35 p.m. He also felt sorry for himself, observing the proximity of Vivian Rivington and Simon Matchett at a table in the corner. Near them sat Sheila Hogue and Oliver Darrington. Willie Bister Strawn Jerry had seen wandering throughout the rooms, looking for the vicar. Jerry heard his name and looked up in the mirror to see Melrose Plant standing behind him.
We just got here. Sorry I've been so long, but my dear aunt has been bending my ear for the last hour. Have you seen the vicar?
No, but he's supposed to be here.
Look, according to Agatha...
Agatha squeezed in between them, shoving Jerry aside.
Agatha can speak for herself. A pink gin, please, Melrose.
Surprisingly, Inspector, even I think you should listen to what my aunt has to say. Agatha regarded Jerry now much as the Queen might run her eye over some drab of a kitchen girl.
This afternoon I paid a visit to the vicar. If you want my opinion, Chief Inspector...
Get to the vicar, Agatha.
Who's telling this, Melrose?
He shrugged.
After my visits to just about everyone on the list...
The bracelet, Agatha, said Melrose. Jerry kept his countenance. Am I to understand this has something to do with the Judd girl's missing bracelet, Lady Ardrey?
That's the thing I've been trying to tell you, were it not for the constant interruptions of my nephew. I found the bracelet,
Melrose corrected.
The vicar found, you mean? Smith wouldn't even tell you where, because he didn't want to have you tell the whole of Long Biddleton. That was not the reason, Melrose. He didn't want to endanger my life. Good God, it won't, will it?
Jerry felt his scalp prickle. When did he find it? How long has he known about it?
I don't know precisely. I was with him this morning. He's been trying to get hold of you.
And you actually saw the bracelet, Lady Agatha?
Well, naturally. The vicar has secreted it somewhere now. He said he was going to put it right back where he found it. It was such a good hiding place. But he wouldn't tell me where.
Jerry got up from the table and strode over to Bister Strawn's group. Mr. Bister Strawn, did the vicar say he was going to be here at some definite time?
Well, yes. An hour ago. 8 o'clock sharp, he said.
Jerry and Plant were out the door before the others could close their gaping mouths. The knife-like letter opener had been plunged into Denzil Smith's chest nearly all the way up to the ivory-carved hilt. The body of the vicar was lying in the middle of the library floor, face up. Though not in a shambles, the library of the vicarage had clearly been searched, books thrown from the now bare shelves, drawers pulled out, closets opened. Melrose Plant looked about.
I don't understand. If he were after the bracelet, why would the murderer have exposed himself just to retrieve it? Wasn't it only an ordinary charm bracelet to anyone except himself and Ruby Judd?
Jerry went around behind the desk, sat down, and being careful to use a handkerchief while he did so, called the Wetherington station. He left instructions for Wiggins to come along with the lab crew. I don't imagine it was only to get at the bracelet. Maybe he came for something else. Ruby's diary. Jerry balled up the bit of paper on which he had doodled. As he started to toss it in the wastebasket, he noticed a sheet of paper lying half under a piece of lava-like rock that served as a paperweight. Jerry pulled it out and looked at what appeared to be disjointed notes made, possibly, for a sermon. Listen to this. The vicar's made some odd notes here. Bacchanals, Hirondelle, God encompasseth us. What on earth do you suppose he means by all that? There was a squelch of tyres outside to the rear of the vicarage, and through the dark pane they could see a flashing blue light. The lab crew came stumbling in, along with Detective Sergeant Wiggins. Rain had started and was coming down in sullen, slanting waves. The perfect night for a murder. Jury was at the desk, studying the notes the vicar had made. A clap of thunder and a terrified shout from Wiggins made Jury whirl round to see, in a flash of lightning, a shape and a pale face outlined beneath the French window. Jury bolted toward the window, and then stopped, seeing who it was. "Lady Ardrey! What in the hell—" She stepped inside, dripping buckets of water. "No need for obscenities, Inspector. I've been watching the proceedings." Then she must have remembered poor Denzil was a good friend, and she dropped her head in her hands. But there were moans. "Lady Ardrey, the vicar said he was going to put the bracelet back in the same place he found it. Is that right?" Agatha nodded. Melrose suggested, "What about the church?" "Of course. No one thought of the church. Let's have a look, then." Jury had his electric torch, and Plant had got another from the Bentley. The church was very damp, very cold, and lit by spider-webs of moonlight, diffused through the window traceries. Switching on his torch, Jury let it play over the pews, which ran the length of the nave. There was a rude loft, no doubt built after the Reformation. A loft staircase had been cut in the masonry. The pulpit was higher than any Jury had ever seen before, one of those 18th-century three-deckers, the pulpit, lectern, and clerk's seat combined in 3 tiers. A little staircase running up to the pulpit allowed the vicar to ascend. Jury mounted the narrow, thin stair. There was a shelf running around the inside of the pulpit, on which were a few books. Jury noticed the lamp, which was hung over the pulpit on a brass arm. He reached up and pulled the beaded cord. A pool of warm light spread across the pulpit and fanned out through the chancel. Jury descended the steps, and the 3 of them walked under the chancel arch. There was a small sacristy. Jury played his light over the tiny room, and let it stop a moment on the chalice. Perhaps it was his insatiable policeman's curiosity. He walked over to it and drew the napkin off the top. Inside the cup was a gold charm bracelet. Quickly he pulled a handkerchief from his hip pocket, shook it open, and reached into the chalice. He went back out to the altar. Agatha saw what he was holding. "Good Lord!" It was really rather clever of Ruby. I think it was a kind of insurance. She knew the bracelet was important, and knew eventually it would be discovered, if she didn't get back to claim it herself. One would almost think she'd had a head on her shoulders. "That, Inspector, is doubtful." When they returned to the man with the load of mischief 15 minutes later, Jury found that Constable Pluck had managed to detain the others, and that they were none too happy about it. They were bunched up at the bar. Trueblood, Simon Matchett, the Willie Bister Straughns, and Vivian and Isabel Rivington. Jury asked Daphne Murch to bring him cigarettes, and read through the statements Pluck had taken down. There was not one of them who could substantiate an alibi for the hour or 2 before they got to the inn. "And now, if I could see each of you in the small room at the front." Constable Pluck sent in Simon Matchett first. Ruby Judd's bracelet was lying on the gate-legged table. Matchett rolled his thin cigar in his mouth. "Ruby Judd's. How are you so sure, Mr. Matchett?" "Because the girl came over here rather often, to see Daphne. She always wore it." Jury indicated Pluck's notes. "According to this, Mr. Matchett, you had gone to shops in Sidbury and got back here at about 6:30. "Yes, as well as I can remember." "I see. Mr. Matchett, what is your relationship with Isabel Rivington?" "Isabel? I don't think I understand you." "Yes, you do. I get the impression that her feelings for you are more than friendly. I'm sure you get the same impression." "Look, that was over a long time ago, Inspector. A very long time ago. At the risk of being less than gallant, I'll only add, at least for me, it's over." "And does Vivian know about this old liaison?" "I hope to God not, Inspector." A generous thought, Mr. Matchett. Next, Isabel Rivington sat across from him, looking expensively composed. "Where were you, Miss Rivington, before you came up to the man with a load of mischief this evening?"
"I told Constable Pluck."
"I know. Now tell me."
"I went for a walk, up the High Street, poked about in the shops."
As she leaned toward the table to flick ash from her cigarette into the china tray, her eye went to the bracelet. She said nothing and leaned back. "Have you seen that bracelet before, Miss Rivington?"
"No. Why?"
Jury changed the subject. It was the question he had been burning to ask her for 2 days. "Miss Rivington, why have you let Vivian live all of these years with the idea that she was responsible for her father's death?"
"I don't know what you mean."
"Come now, Miss Rivington. Assuming it was an accident at all, it was you up on that horse, wasn't it? Not Vivian?"
"She remembered. Vivian remembered."
Well, Jury thought, with a sigh of relief, there it was. If she could have maintained more control, she might have swaggered her way through. After all, he had no proof. "No, she didn't remember. It was just that neither your story nor hers made much sense, and her story seemed almost learned by rote. Vivian was obviously very fond of her father, and if the little girl was anything at all like the woman, she hardly seems the type to have been always rowing with him. But mainly there was that description of the night in question. It was a very dark, a moonless night, when she supposedly went out to the stables. Now, she was only 8, and this is Sutherland we're talking about. I have an artist friend who loves the Highlands, loves to paint there, not only because it's beautiful, but because of the light. He jokes about being able to stand on a street corner and read a book at midnight because it's still light. It's highly unlikely a little girl would be all dressed up and dashing about at midnight." Jury drew the typed report on James Rivington from the folder. "Time of accident, 11:50 p.m. So I came to a couple of conclusions. Whether or not the horse business was an accident or deliberate on your part, I don't know. I envisioned something like this. You're up on the horse kicks your stepfather. You rush up to your little sister's room, pull some clothes on her, and bring her down to the stable. You don't even need to put her up on the horse. All you had to do was implant the idea in her mind that she was on it. And over the years you kept insinuating a lot of nonsense about the fights she had with Rivington, to keep her feeling guilty, to keep her under your influence as much as possible. How vile, Miss Rivington. How utterly vile of you. Why did you kill him? That will of his must have been an enormous disappointment to you." Her mouth was so red against the pallor of her skin, she looked like someone in pretty clown makeup. "What are you going to do?" "Make a bargain with you. You'll have to tell Vivian. Tell her enough of the truth so she won't have to be weighed down under what must be unbearable guilt. Tell her you caused the accident. You can put on a big act of having been terrified, etc., etc. Cry a bit. I'm sure you can manage it. You've been deceiving her for 20 years. I'm sure you can bring off one more deception." Some of the colour returned to Isabel's face. "And if I don't, you can't prove one damn thing." "Be damn sure I will. And I may leave out that it was an accident. Miss Rivington, all I need to do is drop a word in somebody's ear around here, and you'd be finished." She shot out of the chair and made for the door. "That's absolutely unethical. No decent policeman would do such a thing." "I never claimed to be decent, did I?" Sunday, December the 27th. Jury and Plant sat in the bleak dawn of the long Piddleton station. Jury stared down at the paper which he had taken from the vicar's desk. If it wasn't notes for a sermon, what was it? Melrose looked over Jury's shoulder. "God encompasseth us." That doesn't sound like the Reverend Smith, too religious. And then it's a quotation, perhaps. Biblical? Melrose took up the paper. "Hirondelle, French for swallow." Swallow? Does that mean anything to you, Mr. Jury? Jury shook his head. They sat for a good 5 minutes, looking at the words, until Jury threw down his pen in disgust. I guess I'm just dim, but I can't make it out. I'm simply going to assume, though I could be dead wrong, that the murderer might have come to pay a friendly call on the vicar to see if he could get any information out of him, and that while they talked, it occurred to the vicar that this caller might be guilty of these murders. So he sat quietly at his desk, making his notes. Why not simply write down the name of the guilty party? It must have been that Smith thought his life was in danger, and that the murderer would certainly have gone about removing anything incriminating from the premises. I think we've been underrating Mr. Smith, and I only hope he hasn't overrated us. He was hoping we'd be smart enough to hit on something the murderer couldn't. Jury tossed the paper to Melrose Plant. There! You can do the Times crossword in 15 minutes. Then you can figure this out. Plant's reply was interrupted by the prr, prr of the telephone. Jury here, Chief Superintendent Racer said with extreme politeness. Inspector Jury, there have been 3 more murders since you've got there. What have you been doing, advertising? Jury munched a digestive biscuit. Ah, Superintendent Racer, I was hoping you'd call. Oh, weren't you just, Jury? I've called every day since you've been there, lad, and got no reply. You're chewing in my ear, Jury. Can't you forego the food and drink long enough to report? A publican, a caterer. That's what you should have been. Well, this tears it, Jury. You can expect me in Northants at noon today. The way I make it out is this. Not counting today, it would average out to approximately 2/3 of a murder for every day you've been there. Yes, sir. I suppose it does rather work out that way, fraction-wise. Expect me there on the noon train. Get me digs in the best place around, and try to find one where I won't be throttled in my sleep. With only you to protect me, I'm nervous, lad. And make sure the place has a decent menu and stocks its wine cellar. Though I expect in a one-eyed town you can't have everything. I'll see you later. Jury yawned into the dead receiver. Plant said, Friend of yours? Chief Superintendent Racer. He doesn't care for the way I'm handling the case. Coming here himself. An hour later, they were still going over the vicar's notes when Wiggins and Pluck came in. Wiggins shook a light dust of snow from his coat. She's here, sir. Daisy Trump. Pluck broke in. We put her up at the Bag o' Nails, just outside Dorking Dean. Wouldn't stay at any of the other ends, she wouldn't, and I can't say as I blame her. Jury turned to Melrose. Let's go along there, then, to the inn. Wiggins can man the fort here, and Constable Pluck can drive. Miss Trump, according to the waitress who served them their coffee at the Bag o' Nails, would be with the gentleman directly. Jury spooned sugar into his coffee. Daisy Trump worked at the Goat and Compasses. Funny name, that. It's no wonder your aunt can't get our English names straight. Plant smiled. And Ruthven. Ruthven instead of Riven. Melrose caught his breath. Pluck! Jury grinned. Oh, I think even your aunt can say Pluck. Plant was not smiling. Pluck! Get Pluck in here, man! Jury did as he was bid. In a few moments he was back with the puzzled Constable Pluck in tow. Without preamble, Melrose ordered, Say it again, Pluck! Poor Pluck stood there, bunching his cap in his hands, looking like a man just called up for poaching on his lordship's acreage. Say what, my lord? What you said before. You said you'd got Daisy Trump, and you put her up. Pluck scratched his head stupidly. Yes, sir. I said we put her up at the Bag o' Nails. Yes, that's it. That's it, said Melrose. How could I have been so stupid? Say it again, Pluck. You mean Bag o' Nails, sir? You hear it, Inspector? It's that it sounds differently when Pluck says it, since his diction, you'll pardon me, Constable, is not quite precise. He slurred it a bit. Come on, Inspector. Bag o' Nails. Jury suddenly clapped his hand to his head. My God! Bag o' Nails. Constable, go back to the station and tell Wiggins to sit by the telephone. Pluck saluted, turned smartly, and left. And now, Inspector, the Goat and Compasses. Say that 2 or 3 times and slur it. Jury mouthed the words. God encompasseth us.
Matchett. It's Matchett. Those were two of the inns his wife owned. But what was the third? There's no inn named Hirondelle. Of course not, Inspector, said Melrose. It's a derivative name, like the others. Good Lord, no wonder the vicar thought you might be able to pick up on the message. He'd been talking to us about inn signs. How damnably clever. What was the name of Matchett's third inn? Jury was already looking through the papers he'd brought with him, the folder on the Matchett case. Goat and compasses. Devon. Devon, here it is. Well, I'll be damned. What is the name? The Iron Devil. Daisy Trump was in her early 50s or thereabouts, a round little person, like a ball about to bounce away. Jury began. You were a chambermaid at an inn in Devon, Dartmouth it was, run by a Mr. and Mrs. Matchett, about 16 years ago, Miss Trump?
Aye, where that awful murder happened. The madam it was, and they never found out who done it. Whoever it was, who broke into her study that night and made off with the money.
You remember the Smollets, I expect. She was cook, but I'm not sure just what he did.
Nothing, mostly. Right old layabout was Will Smollett. Rose was my very best friend. Dead now, poor soul. That husband of hers just did odd jobs from time to time. Him and that Ansie the Pansy, they was thick as thieves.
What was his name? Jury asked. Daisy Trump shrugged.
I don't rightly remember. Ansie, we called him.
Do you think you could remember the events of that evening? I know it's been a long time, but...
Remember? I should say. I only wish I could forget sometimes. What with me, mind you, even being suspected. They wanted to know, did I drug the poor woman's cocoa? It was me always took the tray to the madam's office of an evening, and then either Rose or me, one of us, would come and get it. That night it was Rose, poor thing, and don't think she didn't get a proper shock, seeing the missus bent over the desk that way.
Jury broke in. Part of the inn, a courtyard, had been turned into a theatre, is that right? And the room Mrs. Matchett used was just down a narrow hall from the stage?
Aye, that's it, sir. I think she always wanted to know just what Mr. Matchett was up to. I wonder he married her in the first place. For a soft berth, maybe.
Jury drew the charm bracelet out of his pocket.
Did you ever see this, Miss Trump?
She took the bracelet, looked it over carefully, then raised a shocked face to Jury.
Where did you get this, sir? This here bracelet? It was the madam's. Stake my life on it, I would. The reason I remember it so well is each one of these little charms had some special meaning. This fox she liked to ride hounds. And this here little cube with the money in it, she had some kind of bet on with Mr. Matchett. I remember.
There was a play on that night, wasn't there? Othello?
I don't remember which play, Inspector. Morbid thing it was. As I went along with the tray to the madam's office, I could hear him, Mr. Matchett, shouting at one of the other actors.
Yes, Miss Trump. And then?
I was about to leave the tray outside when I noticed the door was open a bit, and Mrs. Matchett asked if that was me, and would I just put the tray inside on the little table by the chair, and so I went in.
Do you think you could actually close your eyes and envision the room, Miss Trump? And then describe the proceeding as you see it in your mind's eye? Obediently, Daisy clasped her eyes shut, as if Jury were a stage hypnotist.
She says to me, through the door, that is, Daisy, please put the tray on the table by the chair. Then I goes in, sets down the tray, and she says to me, kind of over her shoulder, like, Thank you. And I asks her, Will there be anything else, Mum? And she says, No, thank you. Then she goes back to her books. She kept all the money accounts. Clever woman was the missus, but cold-like. Not like Mr. Matchett, not at all. Ever so nice he was.
Who do you believe killed Mrs. Matchett?
Why, a thief, of course. To tell the truth, I even wondered about that Smollett and Ansie the Pansy. Wouldn't have put it past either of them. Though I'd not have mentioned it, not for the world, because of Rose, you see.
Something had turned over in Jury's mind, like the leaf of an old book. Devon. Dartmouth was in Devon. Rose. Mrs. Rosamond Smollett. Will Smollett. Marshal Trueblood's words came back to Jury.
There was this aunt and uncle in Devon. Ruby's Aunt Rose and Uncle Will.
Will Smollett. William Small. From the folder, he took pictures of the murder victims, Small and Ainsley, and passed them over to her. Miss Trump, do you recognize these men? She picked up the one of Small.
I should say I do. That's the living image. I mean, yes, that's Will.
Her eye moved to the second picture.
Dear God in heaven, if it ain't the image of Ansie the Pansy. Ainsley, that's it. We was always kidding about dropping his H's. His name was Hainsley. Rufus Hainsley. Can't you even get your own name straight? We used to kid him.
Like Smollett, simply changing his name to Small, thought Jury. Did the Smolletts have a niece who stayed with them sometimes?
Didn't they ever? Ruby. Little Miss Curious into everything.
Jury held up the bracelet. She might have stolen this, then?
That? Not likely, sir. Mrs. Matchett, she wore it all the time, she did. Almost like some women feel about their wedding rings. Oh, no, Ruby wouldn't lay hands on that. Not unless it was over the madam's dead body.
Daisy Trump left. Jury sat at the table, his cold coffee pushed to one side, and stared at the diagram of the office Celia Matchett had occupied that fatal night at the Goat and Compasses. Matchett had to have killed his wife. It was his only motive for the present murders. Ergo, this little scene in the office had been staged for an audience of one, Daisy Trump, the only witness to Celia Matchett still being alive at that moment. But she wasn't alive then. Jury would have bet his badge on it. Ergo, the woman at the desk was not Celia Matchett, but a stand-in. And the only likely prospect for that was the mistress, Harriet Gethvin Owen. People see what they expect to see, and Daisy Trump had expected to see Celia. From behind, a certain costume, a wig perhaps, and the room in shadows. Jury ordered up some more coffee, and said to Melrose Plant, I want you to put your mind to this. I'm sure Matchett killed his wife. But the question is, how the devil did he manage it? The snag is, of course, the alibi. Neither Matchett or his girlfriend could, to all appearances, have been near Celia during the time the police fixed for her murder. But isn't that done all the time, Inspector? I mean, you kill someone and then stuff them down a well or something and have someone else take their place for the crucial time period to fix your alibi. When did the play start? Jury opened the folder. 8:30, or a few minutes after. And when was Celia, or the other woman dressed as Celia, that is, seen in the office? Jury turned a page and ran his finger down it. About 10:40, from what Daisy Trump said. For a good 2 or 3 minutes, Plant was silent, smoking. Then he spoke. The play's the thing, Inspector. I beg your pardon? You're not saying you know how he did it? Yes, but I'd rather show you than tell you. I will have to make arrangements. And before Jury could protest, Plant was heading for the telephone. A half hour later, Pluck deposited Jury at the Long Piddleton station. Wiggins was inside, ministering to himself with nose drops. Wiggins, I'll be at Ardrey End.
Yes, sir. But Chief Superintendent Racer's here. Was here. He's gone off.
Never mind that. Look, I want you to hop it up to the man with a load of mischief and keep an eye on Matchett. Don't let him out of your sight, but don't let him know it.
You mean you suspect him?
That's right, Sergeant. And another thing. Jury broke into a coughing fit. He hoped to God he wasn't catching one of Wiggins' nameless diseases. He blew his nose and went on. Another thing, when Superintendent Racer returns, if you should happen to forget just where I've gone, well, it's all right. I won't hold it against you.
I've a rotten memory, sir. But here.
Wiggins reached in his pocket and brought out a brand-new box of cough drops.
You best take these. Oughtn't to neglect a cough like that, you know.
I really don't need them, Sergeant. Wiggins, if sometimes uncertain about matters of police procedure, was not to be toyed with here.
I insist. Put them in your pocket.
Meekly, Jury did as he was bid. When he walked into the drawing-room of Ardry End, Jury was surprised to see Lady Ardry, Vivian Rivington, and Riven's wife, Martha. Agatha seemed surprised to see Inspector Jury.
"So there you are. I suppose you realise that Superintendent Racer, a most unpleasant man, I must say, has been trying to track you down ever since he got here."
She wheeled on Melrose Plant.
"I asked you when you called where he was, Plant, and you said you'd not seen him all day."
"I lied." Riven coughed discreetly. "Begging your pardon, sir. I believe the superintendent is ensconced at the Man with the Load of Mischief, sir. I believe he wanted to be at the scene of the crime." Scene of the wine cellar would be more like it. Plant drew a chair around for Jury, placing it about 30 feet from a curtained alcove.
"Now then, Inspector Jury, we are going to present a scene, or part of one, from Othello. I shall play that part. Martha, Riven's wife, is to be Amelia. Vivian will be Desdemona. All right, you have your parts, everyone?"
Truculently, Agatha said,
"You have parts, Plant. All I'm to do is—"
"Agatha, don't talk about it, just do it.
Now get back there and do as you're told."
Agatha made a face at Melrose's back and let the curtain drop in front of her. Melrose made a sweeping gesture with his hand.
"Inspector Jury, pretend this area is the stage. The curtained recess is Desdemona's bed. Now, Othello has been on stage for some time with Desdemona. There's a lot of talk about the handkerchief and Iago. Vivian, Desdemona, is in the bed."
Vivian took her place, lying down rather awkwardly among the pillows and the bedclothes.
"Kill me tomorrow. Let me live tonight,"
said Vivian.
Melrose added, "Now, here the stage direction reads, smothers her."
And Melrose picked a pillow from the bed and held it a bit above Vivian's face. Then he turned away from the bed, dropping the pillow, and pulled the curtain in front of it.
Martha Riven, standing off to the left, having watched the proceeding intently, walked up and pretended to be knocking at an invisible door. From behind the curtain came a rustling and a moan from Vivian. "Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord!" Martha still beat on the door, the thin air, with both hands. Melrose made an elaborate display of looking from Martha to the bed and recited, "What? Not dead yet?" He walked over and pulled the curtain back, where Desdemona lay obscured partially by the dishevelled bedclothes and pillows. Melrose stood in front of her, raised the pillow, and lowered it, saying, "I would not have thee linger in thy pain." There came from the bed another thrashing and moaning. In the meantime, Martha, Amelia, was still pretending to hammer on the door with upraised fists. Melrose got up from the bed, where he had been leaning over poor Desdemona, and again closed the bed curtain. He went to the absent door, pretended to open it, and Martha walked through. "I do beseech you, that I may speak with you, O good my lord," said Martha. Plant put his hand on her arm. "That's enough, Martha. We've made our point. From here, Inspector, there would have to be one change. In the text, Amelia goes to the bed, and Desdemona says, 'Commend me to my kind lord,' and dies. That would have to be omitted, because Desdemona is already dead." Melrose drew back the bed curtain. Agatha sat up in the bed, rubbing her throat. "You did it deliberately, Plant. You nearly killed me, you silly fool." Vivian had in the meantime come in through the French window from outside, shivering. "Good Lord, Melrose, next time you want me to do Desdemona, give me a coat. It's freezing." Jury was momentarily struck dumb. A switch. It had been a switch. The drugged body of Celia Matchett put in the bed in place of Harriet Gethvin Owen. Jury applauded. After Plant had got rid of the women, he and Jury settled down before the fire. Jury said, "It wouldn't have taken much of an actress to throw a few words over her shoulder to the maid." Plant lit up a cigar. "No, and I imagine she had on Celia Matchett's clothes under her costume, and her hairdo under the stage wig. Probably Harriet made sure the room wasn't well lit. They had to make sure someone saw Celia alive whilst the play was in progress. She was actually lying dead on the stage." "On the stage," Jury said. "God, what nerve! smothering her right before the eyes of the whole audience. My guess is that Ruby Judd found that bracelet somewhere round the stage bed. For Simon Matchett, it would be a real facer, wouldn't it? What in hell was his wife's bracelet, the bracelet she always wore, doing on Ruby Judd's arm 16 years later? He must have guessed where she found it. Then he finds out that more than one person knows about it. Only just imagine. It must have been like a horrible game of dominoes for him. First he discovers Ruby's told her uncle. Then her uncle lets him know he's told Hainsley, and perhaps the policeman, Jubal Creed. He was working against time, and he couldn't leave the village anyway. "Inspector, you think Ruby was blackmailing Matchett herself?" said Melrose. "More likely sexual blackmail. Maybe she thought she could get him to marry her. After all, she tried it on with just about every other man in town, and Matchett is the most attractive of all. Where was she going when she left, if not to meet someone? Stupid girl. Yet she left the bracelet behind, and somewhere, damn it, that diary. But if they were thinking of blackmailing Matchett, Small and his friends, well, Matchett has no money to speak of. Oh, stupid me. Vivian Rivington does, though. Matchett would have to marry Vivian to get it." "Exactly, Mr. Plant. Matchett could have told Ruby that after he'd got the money, well then, he'd get rid of Vivian and marry Ruby. Frankly, I think Simon Matchett could convince any woman of any damn thing he wanted, like Isabel Rivington, for example." "What do you mean?" "Well, you wondered, didn't you, why Isabel, so besotted with Matchett herself, would push Vivian at him? To say nothing of losing control of the money herself. Inspector, you're not suggesting Simon and Isabel have some sort of arrangement, as Simon and Ruby might have had?" "Well, yes, of course. Though I doubt we'll ever know the truth of it. But that's what I've always thought." Melrose looked at Jury for a long moment. "What do you suppose ever happened to Harriet Gethvin Owen?" "What I wonder is, what was going to happen to Vivian Rivington?" They drank their whiskey and sodas and stared at one another, and then at the fire. Jury drove slowly toward the high street, heading in the opposite direction from the man with a load of mischief. He was delaying the tiresome, inevitable meeting with Chief Superintendent Racer. When he got to the driveway which led up to the church, he pulled in and parked his car. At least the church was the one place he doubted Racer would be nosing around, and he wanted some time to think. The Church of St. Rules was damp and cold. As Jury sat in one of the rear pews, the feeble light of the evening faded from the aisles and the corners, even as he watched. The small hymnals were lined up on the narrow shelf that ran the length of the pew in front of him. Jury picked one out, opened it to number 136, and intoned a few bars of Onward Christian Soldiers. Then, feeling a little silly, he closed the book and looked absently at the cover. It was stamped in rather worn gold, Hymns. It was small, red leather. The voice of Mrs. Gaunt, or was it Daphne, came back to him. "I come in and I saw her writing. It was in her diary, a little red book." It took Jury no more than 15 minutes, going along behind each pew before he finally found it, slightly fatter than the hymnals, and of a different shade of red. On the outside, in the approximate position where the word hymnal was inscribed on the others, was the one word diary. Block letters, dramatically enlarged, graced the first page. Ruby Judd. Jury took the book up to the pulpit, and then pulled the neck of the narrow brass lamp down, so that the light would play brightly upon the pages of the book. Most of it was the kind of drivel about boys or men, the sort of syrupy nonsense he would have expected. Jury flicked forward several pages and found what he wanted, an account of that pillow fight with Daphne.
"Rolled off the bed, I did, and when her arm dangled down, grabbing for me, that bracelet she wears, it slid off. Suddenly it all come back to me. I was lying under a bed, and an arm just dangling down, and a bracelet. Years ago it was. God! Then I remembered, sudden-like, what bracelet this was I found. It was hers, that Mrs. Matchett's that got killed. What does it mean?"
That was underlined. There was no entry for a couple of days. Then it seems that Ruby had gone to the Wetherington Library
and looked back in the stacks of old newspapers and read it all up. The murder at the Goat and Compasses. But she knew now that Celia Matchett had been killed in the bed, and not in her office. She remembered with the sudden recollection of the 7-year-old, the vivid feeling of that limp arm. Then she started planning.
Called Uncle Will today. If he'd remember, anyone would. And at first he told me I was bonkers. Well, it took me a long time, but I finally got it over to him that Simon must have done it, must have killed her. I remember now how scared I was. That arm. You.
The next day's entry.
Uncle Will rung me back and told me not to do anything, that he was ringing up some friends of his, some copper. I kind of got the idea he was talking about getting money out of Simon. I remember I told him there was talk. Simon was going to marry this frumpy old heiress. Pots of money she's got.
And the next day.
But if Uncle Will can get money out of Simon, why can't I get other things too?
There was a lapse of 2 or 3 days, and then she wrote,
He was down the cellar getting the wine for the dinner, and I just kind of took myself down there and held out the bracelet and asked him, didn't he remember it? Then I just up and told him what I knew. At first I thought he was going to hit me, but he reaches over and kisses me. And that's when he asked me to go away with him for the weekend, so's we can work things out. I just remembered, though, Uncle Will told me to take off this bracelet and leave it somewhere, and that's all right with me. I'll be wearing a big diamond soon. I just thought of a marvellous place to leave the bracelet. Won't that be a bit of a giggle?
And the final entry.
Can't write now. Must close. More tomorrow.
So deep was he into the schoolgirl passion of Ruby Judd that he had only half heard the heavy oak door of the church open and then swish shut. Jury could not see into the dark vestibule of the church, but he knew Matchett's voice. I saw the light from the road and wondered who might be here at this hour. There was something unnerving, in any circumstances, in holding a conversation with a disembodied voice. The only point of light in the church was the puddle cast by the lamp over the pulpit. Jury felt like a jack-lighted deer. I suppose the same thing occurred to me as to you, Inspector. If the diary weren't in the vicarage, then possibly the church. I assume you're not up there reading the Book of Common Prayer. Your detective sergeant has been like a hound at my heels. Doesn't seem to want me to go anywhere, however hard I try. No, don't worry. He's quite all right, sleeping by the fire. Hot buttered rum, rather liberally laced with sedatives. Now, I think I'd better have that little book, Inspector. Jury assumed that there was a gun levelled at him. What Jury wanted now was to give himself a bit of time to study his predicament. Slightly out and above this 3-tiered pulpit was the rude loft, perhaps not more than 3 feet off. The height and distance of the loft were not great, though God only knew he was not so agile as he used to be. Jury knew serial murderers like Matchett were horribly vain. They found their own cleverness irresistible. Would you satisfy my curiosity on 1 or 2 points, Mr. Matchett? Why did you choose to make such an outlandish display of the bodies? Well, surely you guessed the red herring idea, Inspector? The Judd girl, her uncle, and Hainsley, and that policeman friend of theirs, Creed, all of them were more or less upon me simultaneously. If I couldn't do it quietly, I decided I'd go to the other extreme. The jury did not much care for the sound of movements, which indicated Matchett was coming down the nave. But Jury was too busy judging the amount of leverage he'd need to waste emotion on this invisible man. Does murder get to be a habit after a while, Mr. Matchett? Well, perhaps, but I really must insist on having that diary now, Inspector. And if you would be so kind as to move very slowly down those pulpit steps. Not much choice now, have I, mate? Jury suddenly switched off the light and ducked behind the pulpit as the first shot splintered the wood above his head. Then he jumped to its edge and heaved his weight toward the rude loft. The now total darkness was his only cover, and it took every ounce of strength to grasp the edge of the loft. His hands grabbed and held, and he dangled momentarily until his last burst of strength pulled him up and over. Another shot landed in the general direction of the ceiling boss above his head, and then there was stillness, which he tried not to break by breathing. At the moment, Jury's mind was engaged in trying to figure out what shot of gun Matchett had, and how many shots were left. Jury jumped from the loft to the gallery on his right, just as Matchett reached the top of the stairs. There was another flash and a shot that Jury could have sworn barely missed his ear. Crouching still, he made his way between the benches. Another silence. Slowly he took an electric torch from his raincoat pocket, set it on the gallery ledge, flicked it on, and darted away, while another shot rang out. The torch rolled and crashed into the nave below. What Jury had felt when he brought out his torch was the box of cough drops Wiggins had given him. In the other pocket was the catapult the double boy had given him. Bless you, James. He dislodged a sticky cough drop from the others, placed it in the rubber band, and aimed at the nearest window. There was the pinging sound of glass, followed by another shot. He tried to keep up this reflex action on Matchett's part by quickly aiming another cough drop missile. Jury prayed. Oh, how he prayed. Again, a long silence, and then a light fanning out over the gallery. Jury ducked down. "I admire your diversionary tactics, Chief Inspector," came the voice from below. "But it was just as unfortunate for you to give up your torch, as it was stupid of me not to bring mine. Don't you think you've just as well come down now? I really must have that diary. And then we can go for a little drive." Jury stopped sweating for a moment. Between here and a grave in the woods, he could surely think of something. "I'm coming down, Matchett." As Jury passed between the benches, he quickly plucked a hymnal and held it. Then he descended the steps, and as he reached the bottom, he raised the book above his head, both hands in the air. Jury was walking towards Matchett, and Matchett told him to stop when he was about 10 feet away. "Close enough, I think." At that moment, Jury opened his fingers slightly, and the hymnal fell onto the soft carpeting. "Clumsy, Inspector." Jury started to lean down, knowing full well Matchett would stop him. Inspector. Just kick it over here, if you don't mind." It was what Jury wanted, and he only hoped he had enough strength left in his leg to do the job. Jury jabbed with his heel against the thin carpeting, jerking it back towards him, and doing it just quickly enough to throw Matchett completely off balance. The last shot exploded, grazing Jury's arm, and then he lunged. It was not a hard job, shouldering Matchett back against the pew, and Jury was so enraged, all of the suppressed anger at this madman coming out now, that the blow to Matchett's jaw and the other to his stomach was simultaneous and quite effective. Matchett crumpled and dropped onto the stone floor. The diary was still up in the pulpit. Jury had slipped it under the huge illuminated Bible. He ascended the pulpit once more, switched on the little light, lifted the Bible, and pulled out Ruby Judd's diary. His arms spread-eagled over the pulpit, he looked down at the book, which would put an end to Simon Matchett. Once again he heard the heavy door at the rear swing open and softly smack shut. From the dark recess of the vestibule came the waspish, sarcastic voice of none other than Chief Superintendent Racer. "Finally found your vocation, have you, Jury?" Matchett was taken to the Wetherington station. He had been officially arrested by Racer. The very moment the Chief Superintendent hit town, the case seemed to solve itself. Racer said none of this blatantly, but the cause and effect was not lost on the London reporters. Monday, December the 28th. Delaying as long as possible his goodbye to Vivian Rivington, Jury sat in the Long Biddleton police station, shuffling through papers. The door seemed to wrest itself open, as if torn by ghostly hands, and Lady Ardrey walked in. Melrose Plant, looking apologetic, followed her. Lady Ardrey shot her hand like a switchblade and pumped Jury's.
"Well, we did it, didn't we, Inspector?"
Melrose settled himself in a chair in the corner. He lit up a cigar. Through the tendrils of smoke, Melrose smiled weirdly at Jury. "I'm writing a book." Nearly overturning her chair, Agatha jumped up.
"What on earth are you talking about?"
"Well, just that, Agatha. I'm writing a book about this whole grisly affair."
"But you can't. You know I told you I was writing a kind of semi-documentary, like that Kaput person, about those murders in America."
"Not Kaput, for God's sake. Capote. Must you slaughter the names of your own countrymen? You'd better be getting on with it, or I'll finish before you do." She whirled on Jury. He only shrugged.
Well, you two can sit here lollygagging all afternoon. I've got to get back to my writing.
She raked her walking stick across door and door jamb in her sudden exit. Plant rose, depositing his cigar ash in a tray on the desk.
An inappropriate thing to say in the circumstances, but I'm sorry it's all over. I seldom meet anyone whose mind does not unravel like an old piece of tatting when life becomes problematical.
He drew on his kidskin gloves and patted his cap into place. The jury asked,
Mr. Plant, one question. Why did you give up your title? Why? I'll tell you if I can depend on your not letting it get around. When I put on that cape-like gown and that wig, Inspector, I looked exactly like Agatha.
He was out of the door. Before he closed it, though, he stuck his head around the corner.
There was a reason. I'll tell you some day. Goodbye, Inspector.
Melrose Plant touched his fingers to the brim of his cap in a salute. There was a bench on the green, and the square was once again a clear, glistering white, for it had snowed during the night. Jury stared at the Rivington house. He should go over as he had promised, but he just sat there. Finally he saw the door of the house open and a figure come out. She left behind her a very neat set of tracks on the smooth, crisp whiteness. As Vivian came around the edge of the pond, Jury got up.
I thought you were going to come round at 11. I was watching out the window for you, and then I saw someone sitting over here and wondered if it could be you. Well, I just wanted to thank you for everything.
His mouth felt stiff with cold.
I hope you weren't too downcast by the news, Miss Rivington. Downcast. What a felicitous choice of word. No, not really. I was just horribly shocked. I seem to have surrounded myself with people I couldn't trust. Isabel told me the truth about what happened to my father. She said it was her conscience, that it was weighing very heavily on her. I wonder, after all these years, would one's conscience suddenly begin acting up? You were her conscience, weren't you?
Vivian smiled. When he didn't say anything, she went on.
There's one thing, though, I must know.
What's that? Jury asked.
Simon and Isabel, were they lovers? Did they plan on rather unceremoniously disposing of me and then making off, as they say, with the swag?
She was smiling slightly, but the pain in her eyes went through Jury. It was precisely what Matchett had planned, Jury was certain. The idea of her fiancé and her sister making love and laughing about it behind her back, that must be something of the image she was carrying about in her mind.
No, Miss Rivington, you, and the money, I guess, would have satisfied Matchett.
Vivian expelled a long breath.
Awful to say, perhaps, but I'm relieved, I think. I mean at not having to marry him. I think I shall go to France, or better yet, Italy.
She stood there for a moment longer, looking at him, and then turned back toward her house.
Goodbye, and thank you. How inadequate that sounds.
Her hand merely grazed his. Jury watched her walk away, making another neat line of tracks across the unbroken snow. From this distance, it was like watching a doll go into a dollhouse and shut the door behind her. How long he sat there, staring at the ducks, Jury didn't know. He was supposed to be at Melrose Plant's for lunch. As he was dragging himself off the bench, he heard a rustle in the bushes behind him, and turned just in time to see the top of a mousy brown head disappear below the line of shrubbery.
All right, out of there, straight away.
Jury used as sinister a tone as possible.
If I once use my trusty Magnum 45 on you, you'll go around with your stomachs looking like donuts.
Giggles. Then slowly the doubles came forward.
Well, James. And James. And why are you on my trail today? Come on, out with it.
A bird twittered from the girl as she dipped her face, as if she meant to wash it in the snow. The boy said,
We heard you was leaving, sir. We come to give you this.
He pulled from his sagging coat pocket a rather dirty package wrapped in leftover Christmas paper. It was flat, and tied with a bit of heavily handled ribbon, which once had been white.
A present? I certainly do thank you.
He undid the package and found a piece of cardboard, cut to serve as a kind of crude frame, and against this was glued a picture. It showed a mountain-like projection covered in deep snow, and off in the distance a dark, amorphous creature, like a poorly focused King Kong. It had come from a magazine. Jury scratched his head.
It's that, abominable snowman. Lives in... What's the name of that place?
And he looked to his sister for information, but got only a furious shaking of her head. Her lips were, as always, sealed. Jury helped.
The Himalayas? That's it, sir. Don't it look like him, though? And just look at them tracks, Mr. Jury. That's what I thought you'd like. Them tracks. Just think what he could do round here.
And James spread his arms to take in the village green. Jury smiled and folded the wrapping paper back around the picture. Your other present just about saved my life. And he related a blow-by-blow account of the confrontation in the church. Their large eyes nearly swam in their faces at the telling of this marvel.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph,
said the girl, and quickly clapped her hand to her mouth. So one good turn deserves another. I thought perhaps you two would like to take a little ride with me. He pointed to the police car.
Crikey, said James. You mean in that there police car?
Totally awed, they looked at one another, and then nodded their heads firmly. Confirmation and reconfirmation. As Jury bundled them into the car, he noticed how much better he felt. He envisioned the sweeping, untrammelled vistas of Ardry End, glistening, snow-crusted, smoothly white and gently curving. As the high street became the Dorking Dean Road, Jury thought, "Oh, what the hell," and turned on the siren. April the 15th. Letter from Melrose Plant to Richard Jury.
Dear Jury, you've been gone for 3 months now, and with only Agatha to keep me company, it seems like 3 years. Her visits are considerably reduced, owing to her belief we are in a mad race to see which of us will finish his book first. I simply tell her I've done another chapter, and that sends her scurrying home. Isabel has gone, and so is Vivian, but definitely not together. Vivian settled a bit of money on her with the understanding she'd stay out of her life. Vivian has got herself a villa in Naples. Aren't you due for a holiday? I have a dog. I was thinking of getting one anyway. One of those sleek ones, like a whippet. The sort that turns up in drawing-room pictures of country gentlemen. However, I had cycled out to the man with a load of mischief one wet afternoon, for sentimental reasons, perhaps. Or does that sound too macabre? And walked about. I wandered back behind the stables to find, guess who? Mindy, Matchett's dog. I can fancy a man killing 5 people, but to leave one's dog stranded is really beneath contempt. At any rate, I allowed the brute to follow me home, a lengthy procedure, since Mindy is not very quick, as you may remember. Those peculiar children, the doubles, visit me now and again. Heads pop up in the shrubbery at odd moments. The girl I especially admire for her having learnt so young the secret of truly good conversation. Silence. May I ask you a favour? If ever you come across another case, really, I'm not particular, and if you would permit me to be of any help to you, do. My life here offers little challenge to the imagination. There is no more snow. The heavy embossed stationery was signed in thick black ink with the one word, Plant. Looking at the little white square of Plant's letter, with the address in small black figures, brought back to Jury great expanses of crystallized snow, with tracks running through it. Well, as Plant said, there was no more snow. He looked out of his window, grey and dismal with rain. He plucked up his raincoat and walked out of the door. Jury also loved the rain.
The Man with a Load of Mischief was written by Martha Grimes and read by Tim Curry. It was abridged for audio by Jill Ellen Riley.
The sign creaks low on a Cotswolds night. Man with a load, grinning in lantern light. A pint goes down, a glass hits the floor. Someone's crossed out a name behind the door. Blood on the stones, brandy in the flame. The fire dies slow, but it don't feel the same. Mischief don't shout, mischief don't scream. It slips through the cracks of a village dream. One card, one life, one lie undone. The man with the load has only begun. Steps in from the rain-soaked lane, sees the body, feels the stain. Another name waits to be crossed. Carry the load. Carry the load. Mischief walks where the